All right, one more time. That was the rehearsal. Here we go. And this is the second take for the Historical Detective Agency Lounge. We are here with Colonel Sargis Sangari. We had a nice practice through. Again, as he mentioned before, we were actually live. We're pretending we were live. We can do a lot of skill sets, but video, not so much. But we're great investigators and able to do a lot of good things, especially with history and how that kind of interacts with the present day operations. So before we go on, the news that is going out of Iran right now seems new for a lot of people. Many people begin their historical knowledge of Iran with the embassy takeover, 1979, 1980 with the revolution. Some people go a little bit further back with the overthrow of the Mossadegh administration and the installation of the Shah. Some people, if you've been a reader of our articles, would recognize that no, that actually goes further back. The U.S. involved in World War II. Iran was a major theater, production theater, actually, to send supplies up into Russia through the Volga to Stalingrad. And the British, even before that, to manage their colonies in Afghanistan and Iran, Afghanistan and India, Iran was absolutely central. The Persian corridor was a vital resource. And before that, Iran, arguably, that region was the one making news before any other culture that we're aware of today. They were interacting with the early Egyptians. They were interacting with and actually owned, they administered everywhere from Egypt on over into Afghanistan and India. Alexander the Great, when he was going through there, we were just talking with Sargis before this, Alexander the Great interacted to a large extent with the cultures that are within what is today Iran. And so the history is very deep and varied. It goes through millennia, far more than many Americans are aware of. And the complexities within Iran, it's not just the Iranians, and they're not just the Ayatollah and what we see from groups such as Hezbollah or the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Council. They are a variety of cultures that have, in some cases, history that go well predate the Islamic invasions in the 10th or the 7th, 8th, and 9th century. And the fusion of all of these ideas, all the way from Alexander through to the Islamic armies, through to British, American, and even today, continues. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the very interesting story. It's a fascinating story with Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari about his own personal history and his knowledge at the social, the family level within Iran, and take a look at the history and some things that I think a lot of Americans need to understand about the complexities and some of the dynamics that are going on within Iran as we continue. As I said, today is the March 8th, as we continue to conduct operations within Iran and the Persian corridor. So first off, thank you very much, Colonel Sangari, for coming back here. As we mentioned, again, before we live, I think we've known each other almost 20 years. So going back, as you kind of wandered in there. So it's been fascinating to see. Your history is absolutely amazing. So I think you were the first person I ever met that was an Assyrian Christian. So when I study Assyrians, that's an ancient kingdom, right? That's the Assyrian Empire that came in my shady memory somewhere between Persia and Babylon, right? So that was the extent of when you introduced yourself, you're an Assyrian Christian. I went, wait. And then putting those two together. So the Christian element of your family and your history, that actually predates most of the Western Christians, because I went to Chicago doing a research on the Assyrian church. And it absolutely blew me away, the longevity, the history within that church predates Rome, predates the establishment there. So it's just absolutely fascinating to see this amazing history that's encapsulated within basically your family story and the genealogy. So first off, thank you for coming. And then if you could just give a brief introduction about kind of your background in Iran, how you got here, how you got in the army, and enlighten us on the Assyrian Christians, Iran, and what you think, now that you can talk to Americans on the Historical Detective Agency, what do we need to know that would help us understand this a little bit better as we go forward?
No, much appreciated, Alan. Actually, Alan, you and me have known each other more than 20 years. I know you're trying to make yourself sound younger, but actually, we've known each other for a long time.
You were there when I was born. That's how we met.
And when Al called me, he's like, "Hey, I need somebody to come and talk about Iran." I'm like, "Well, thank you very much for thinking about me. There's much better, capable people." He's like, "I need somebody who's balder and has a beard to really kind of sell the story." I'm like, "No problem. I'm there, buddy, anytime." And I did have more here until I met Al, and then after that, forget about it. It was kind of down the hill. But with all that said, look, I think you have to really the understanding of the region is important, not because of the fact that I mean, geographical is always going to be there. It is just that what happens right here between this space, the 6 inches between the eyeballs, is where you win or lose battles when it comes to. What we have done, whether it be in Iraq or other places that we have ventured into the Middle East region. And if you could go ahead and control this battle space up here, you're much more capable and able to really be able to understand why the Middle East is the way it is. As far as the Syrian Christians are concerned, people can go back and look at the Syrian Empire. I mean, there's wonderful, videos that have been done on the Syrians that have really laid out the reality of how the empire had to expand its footprint in the region, and because of the geography of how the region is laid out, you have to be aggressive in the region to be able to have a say, even going back in the ancient times in the world politics. And if you look at all the fights that took place, I mean, the Hittites and the Egyptians were fighting over the Habur River Valley, which is basically a area within Syria today that was very much of a key node for transfer of technology and transfer of goods and economic services all the way into what most Americans may know as a land of Canaan before it became what it is today, Israel, and all the way down to into Egypt. And the competing interests that have always existed there along the Tigris and the Euphrates were very important. The Huron Valley itself actually starts where you have the Golan Heights, and from the Golan Heights it expands, and the entire country of Iraq sits in this large valley all the way into the what we would call the Persian Gulf, and I know that the United States refers to it as the Arabian Gulf as a kind of a pushback against the Iran today. But the geography doesn't change, guys. It hasn't changed in a long time. And the people within the region really haven't changed. The politics seems to come and go, but the reality of the geography of today Iran, what used to be old Persia, remains the same. It is a very important controlling point that has major effects on global politics. Even the Silk Road that started from China came through that area. When the Assyrians were an empire before anybody else showed up on the battlefield or the battle space, as we call it today, the Assyrians were trading even with the Chinese at that time. They were trading even what the Assyrians had created for themselves was a mesh type of armor for their cab capabilities. And for those who don't know, if you ever have a chance to go to Fort Knox, I'm not sure if the museum still has information out there. It was actually the Assyrians who introduced a light and heavy cab concept in the region. And for them, even though they were in the areas of Tigris and Euphrates, they would always go to the northern portion of what is today northern Azerbaijan territories and northern Iran, and it's where they would get their lumber, and that's where they would get their horses for their military constructions or for their chariots. Actually, the word Kurda was used for the Assyrian military that ventured into the north by the people who lived there. It actually meant fierce warrior. The only close example to that is when we have, the British fighting in the States during the Revolutionary War, and Americans would refer to them as the Redcoats. So Kurda meant fierce warrior. So That name that referenced the Syrian fighters for the Syrian army at the time, for the Syrian Empire, got picked up by the folks that were in the north. And today you hear the word Kurd, but it's a borrowed name referencing those individuals. So historically, there's always been kind of a tie with people just taking from other cultures within the region and utilizing for themselves. 10% of the Quran today, 6 to 10%, is actually has Aramaic words in it. And Aramaic, of course, is a language that Jesus spoke, and the language that the Syrians really spoke. It was a mix of Akkadian spoken, Aramaic written. It was a much easier language. Now, even when the Assyrian king is standing at the gates of Jerusalem, and he's trying to speak in the Hebrew language with individuals that the Assyrians were trying to at the time bring onto heel, based on some of the actions that were taking place that were affecting their economic status within the region. The people in Jerusalem, if you go into the Bible, for those who read it, say everybody here understands your language. That's how extensive that Aramaic language and the Assyrian language was, and the empire. When the Assyrian Empire falls, of course, in 612 BC, the Persians come in. And the Babylonians and then the Persians come in basically and take hold. If you take a look at the majority of the historical capitals that have been built by the Persians, you see similar even in the arts. The Assyrians had what is called a winged bull that you would see at the palaces of the Assyrian kings. The one difference was that the winged bulls are all standing, and they all have an eyeball in the arts that the Assyrians created.
The winged bulls. What do you guys call them? You said there was the wing. It looks like a snake.
Lamassu. Yes, we call them the Lamassu historically, but they're the winged bulls on the American side. Now, if you take a look at when the Persians came in and took everybody from that region and took them to create their magnificent cities, their winged bulls are a little bit different. What is different about them? A lot of them are on their knees. And the eyeball, it doesn't exist in the eyes. Why? Because when the Persians came after the fall of the Assyrian Empire, of course, after Babylon, a lot of the artists, a lot of the engineers, a lot of those individuals, of course, were never killed by the armies that sacked Nineveh and sacked the city of Ashur or Nimrud, but those individuals were retained. The Assyrians of that time, after the fall of the empire, always resisted control by any other empire. So in this particular case, how did the artists that were building the magnificent cities for the Persians resisted? They put the winged bull on its knees, which means that the Assyrian Empire has fallen, and then they took the eyeball out of the winged bulls that were being built for the Persians to say that the soul is gone of the state. If you fast forward to what the modern I should say not modern, but the dress that the Persian wrestlers wear on their knees, they have mirrors. And why do they have mirrors on their knees in their traditional dress? Because it means that this warrior has never been taken down. And again, in the slightest, the cultures that have taken from each other and have been able to communicate their viewpoints as far as what they believe in that particular time in history, how they've resisted maybe other empires in the region is significant. And I think these are the little pieces that sometimes you don't pay attention to, but that these little changes and moves and historical dynamics or cultural dynamics, I should say, are felt by the people in the region who are tied to that region, regardless of where they live around the world thousands of years later. And when you're going into that region, this is the level that you have to operate on and understand. And that level does affect the reality of the person you're looking at and why does he see the world in a different type of focus, or maybe from a different type of a view. And then you add the various different religious components to it. Religious components, the big three religions, of course, being Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and some of the nuances of the cultural that these individuals have, and the ties to their old historical cultures prior to those cultures becoming either Islam or Judaism or Christianity. It tends to have a different viewpoint on the world politics than anything else. Um, Look, Iran has always been there. And as we're looking at the current war, and people think that, well, the current war is going to, in the long term, destroy Iran and wipe it up. Even the United States and Israel, who are fighting against Iran, who are destroying its military capability, are trying to still look at the future to where they can have a relationship with the nation. Why? If you look at Persia, after, of course, the Syrian Empire has fallen, the Persian Empire initially expanded and then fell. The Persians and the Romans always fought, constantly pushing back and forth along borders. Even with Rome controlling everything it could within their region, and even controlling Persia at the time, at a territory that is Iran, Persia. Rome today is a small city, a small country. Iran is still a powerful nation, and that powerful nation is able to sit and negotiate and even push back against major, powers throughout the world. When Alexander came in and actually conquered the region, and all the way into India. And to be honest, some of the stories are attributed to Alexander in India had been written about the Persian kings long before Alexander. Story was written by his folks, especially with the incursions that the Persian kings had taken into India. So the stories that they had written long before Alexander came in are similar and kind of mirror what Alexander has been attributed of doing in India. Alexander, had influence in the region, but today Greece is a small nation, and Iran is still, or remnants of Persia is still very strong on the global stage. The Mongols come in. The Mongols literally burn, the entire civilized society from one end of it to another. The Mongols are gone. Mongolia, a very small nation. Iran is still at the center, and is still has survived even through that process. And this is the attitude of the Iranians, that it doesn't matter who comes in and who attacks us, who wipes us out, who destroys us, who takes our land. In the long term, when history moves forward, Iran still will be there, and the influence of the Persians still will be very much significant in the long term. Look, Iranians and the concepts of Zoroastrianism has influenced a lot of religions. If you go back and look at it, and that concept still resonates in a lot of people in the region, and that context of religious capability, the concept of that these individuals were an empire. They understand what an empire looks like. They understand the how empire at its highest can control a region and administer it, and at the lowest, after it's been destroyed, how it can still survive, still exist in the people of Iran, who are truly Iranians and Persians. And that number is some, or just north of 53+% of people. Of course, Iran, like any other nation, has had various different influences come in. You have now Kurds, you have Turkish Azadi, you have Baluchis, you have other ethnic groups, you have Arabs, especially with the conquest of Islam into the region, and on Iran added their little piece to the Iranian politics. A lot of people may not know, even the Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed in the strikes in the first days of the battle, he wasn't even Persian; he was Turkish Azadi.
So say that again. So just so the audience make sure they understand it. So within Iran, because of the massive history and because of all the movement and all the things that go on there, you estimate right about now it's about 53% are actually Persian, or actually that kind of historical Iranians, if you will. Everyone else is kind of either a conqueror or someone that kind of migrated in there. And during the Islamic invasion, which kind of pushed Zoroastrianism away from a state religion and replaced it with Islam. But the Arabs were the primary motivators of that. They were the drivers of it. The Persians weren't. It was an Arab revolution, really. It was an Arab conquest using Islam, and the Ayatollah was just pretty much assassinated by any other way. A few days ago, he wasn't even Persian, so he's ethnically not even Iranian. He's Arab. So a lot of 53% of the population see him as
yeah, he's Turkish Azadi. He's Turkish Azadi, the one who was killed. And actually, the president of the country is Kurdish. He was born in the Kurdish area. He speaks much better Kurdish than he speaks probably Persian. People, in Iran say as a joke. But a lot of the imams that are running Iran were actually kicked out by the Shah after, of course, he was put in power. Most of them were, if not kicked out and lived in Iraq. There's some that were born in Iraq. The person who was tagged by the Ayatollah Khamenei that if I die, you're going to have to plan who's going to be the next leader and what the actual reply from Iran would be against, whoever takes me out. He himself was born in Iraq. He wasn't even born in Iran. So, you have these outsiders that are actually operating there. And unfortunately for us, to make it easy for ourselves, we say, oh, well, these are the Iranians. No, these are not the Iranians. These are the Turkish Azadis. These are the Kurds. These are the other individuals who have had a controlling factor on what the Iranian people do. The true Iranians are still in the control the bazaar of Iran. They are in that network of the IRGC, as you might say, and others. But that network is somewhere around 20 million, and it controls the entire trade that has sustained Iran and has learned its lesson how to negotiate around sanctions and how to use cryptocurrency and how to be able to tie itself to networks that allow it to survive, or in this case, allow the Iranian government to survive whether it be through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that China is a lead to, all the way into Russia, all the way into South America through the Hezbollah networks and the tri-border area, and even into the United States, where it has had a lot of influence in the past, which is the reason why Iran, like I said, as much as it might be in a weak point tomorrow, might be sitting and negotiating with the various different European countries as to what the future of Iran might look like when it comes to security and economic requirements, and which is why even the state of Israel, an enemy of the current Iranian regime, is hoping for the best to be able to have a relationship with a future Iranian government, because it knows that without having an influence and control on that piece of territory and terrain and with the Persian people, that it will be very difficult for Israel as a state apparatus to be able to sustain itself independently over the long term within the next decade.
Interesting. So how does that, from your experience, and I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, but from your experience, because you mentioned that most of the bazaars, that trade network is primarily Persian. So the Persians kind of run that, the traditional Persians. And you said the IRGC is composed primarily of ethnic Persians. Is that right?
It is ethnic Persians. It has others in it, but you cannot tie into it if you're not. As an example, the Kurds in Iran, when initially just, was it 48 hours ago, the POTUS and the Israelis were saying, oh, the Kurds are ready to start taking provinces up in the north. And then suddenly that flips as of even yesterday, when the POTUS like, you know what, maybe we want to introduce the Kurds, and the Israelis kind of back off on that push, is because the Kurds in Iran, people say, well, they were suppressed or oppressed. Well, they were oppressed if you got up against the government. If you're not, then you had an ability to tie into the network. And when you tie into that network, guess what? Now you can do trade all over the globe through that network, which is a global network. The IRGC system is not just a network tied to a piece of terrain in Iran. As an example, if I'm an IRGC soldier, let's say, I probably have a wife, I have at least 2 kids, and then a mother and a father that in itself is a network. That network has been sustaining the current regime for 47 years. Now, the current regime is an Islamic regime under the Ayatollah, who just became an imam, and that's another story we could talk about. But that network will have to be tied into to be flipped, and it could be to be able to sustain Iran's economy in the long term, even for the benefit of the United States and Israel, who want to strike a Abraham Accord, maybe with it, and have an access to the Persian bazaar that is going to be able to give us the money and the resources that we need, and away from our near peer China, to be able to sustain that nation internally and basically strengthen ourselves within the region. So that network, even the Kurds in Iran had been tied into it, which is one of the things when the Kurds of Iraq were saying, well, we're going to go in there, we're going to collapse the government, there's going to be a piece of terrain called Kurdistan for us. And the Kurds in Iran like, wait a minute, I'm tied into a global network. I made money over 47 years. And now you want me to be burn that network and come and sit in a piece of terrain that is landlocked, that you have decided to take lead on, that is surrounded by all its enemies, whether it be Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria in the future. That's not going to work for me. So this is the reality of the dynamics that you're kind of dealing with when it comes to this economic line of effort or development line of effort that would be needed to sustain anyone who's going to be a leader in the future of Iran. And that individual has to be able to know how to squeeze and control this network. The Ayatollahs were really not in charge of it, to be honest. They had kind of let it flow and be the controller for it. That's why when the bazaars initially started protesting, it was basically an internal fight between individuals that control that network, and the hardliners, as we call it, and maybe the moderates in Iran that were trying to use that to kind of jockey for a possible change in the future if Ayatollah Khamenei had just died and passed away. But of course, he was killed in combat operations, and he goes from being an Ayatollah to being an imam. And when you become an imam, it actually is worse. That's why even today, U.S. still not taking the blame for his death. They're saying, well, the Israelis conducted the operations; they're the ones who killed him. And imagine, the only way I could explain it is, let's say a member of the Muslim community goes in and kills a pope. Well, the pope is going to become a saint, right? So when you become an imam, you become basically a saint. When he becomes a saint, for the next 1,000 years, no Christian will ever forget the fact that there was a member of the Muslim community that killed the Pope. If a Jewish member of the community went out and killed the Pope, no Christian would ever forget the fact that, here's a member of the Jewish community 1,000 years ago that killed one of our popes, who's a saint today. Well, the same thing now for the next 1,000 years, Israel, you're the reason why, the so-called Ayatollah who became an imam was killed. As a historical example, in 680 CE is a battle of Karbala that took place where the grandson of Muhammad and the son of Ali from the Shia faith were actually killed by Yazid. Well, when Hussein was killed, that battle is still remembered in the Ashura festival, which in this year is going to take place on 10th of October. And the Sunnis and the Shia have been killing each other historically for 1,000 years because of that battle. With that said, the same thing. When you make somebody an imam, they have a long-lasting future or long after their death, and there's going to be always ramifications for the individuals who were involved in that battle. There's a lot I'm kind of putting up on the table. I know that your question, needed to be a little bit more pinpoint, but I wanted to make sure at least I let folks know the complications of how difficult it is to kind of negotiate through this landscape that has a tapestry that is 10,000 years old, and this 10,000 years tapestry has a lot of various different cultures that have affected it. In the long term, that terrain has never changed, and it's very significant to what the future of the globe would be, and why it's the reason that the state of Israel today understands that I have to be able to be the biggest influential dog on this piece of terrain for me to even be able to survive, let alone to be able to be a partner with any of the nations that are here.
Wow. Now, so you mentioned, for example, the leadership was not Persian, so, and then most of the kind of the backbone running Iran, the market system, the economic drivers, and then kind of the security drivers, the security apparatus of the state, those were Persians. Is there, and there was some reform earlier. So I think it was what, about 20 years after the revolution, so about 2000 timeframe, Iran was starting to modify. It was starting to kind of reduce the hard line, if you will, of Islamic hard line, and they were doing some internal reforms. In fact, they were negotiating, I think, with the United States, and then George Bush said no, right? And then he placed him the same thing with the Taliban and that sort of thing. He said, "No, you're on the other side. You're with Osama's group. You know, that's you. Put him in the axis of evil," I think was his quote, and that kind of shut down negotiations. Do you see that as being able to be restarted? And if so, would it be more advantageous for an approach to kind of the Persian sensibilities, or, you know, who has the leverage? Would that then, you know, set them up? You mentioned that we stopped with the Kurds because the Kurds are coming in, and it was like, you know, that's not going to work. The Kurds recognized it because there's Kurds in Iran.
That's pretty difficult, you know.
Like, bad idea. We're not gonna do this. Yeah, there's different groups of Kurds.
Here's a lot of money. Here's a lot of weapons. Go do this for us. Hey, you know what? This might not work this time.
So, but again, it was that internal line, right? Because we look at Kurds as something different, and they didn't understand that internal dynamic. What are, as this progresses forward, what are kind of those flashpoints that might occur? Which groups like don't get along? Which groups do get along? Like we just saw, the Kurds are like, yeah, we're not going to do this. Are there friction points in there that, you know, say the Persians want to kind of take over Iran again? Like, okay, hold on, even though they control a lot of it, they're like, you know, the Ayatollahs need to go, or that structure needs to go, or we need to put, you know, Persians up in there to have some more, for lack of a better word, Zoroastrian sensibility.
Yeah. That's very important. The Zoroastrian.
And for the audience, you and I know it, but for the audience, Zoroastrianism was technically the first monotheism, and it was in the empire, you know, a long time. It was actually a state religion for a long time in the Persian Empire, and it was monotheistic. Ahura Mazda was the supreme deity, the monotheistic deity, if you will. Concepts such as a heaven and a hell, a judgment, you know, do good on earth, all that kind of thing. Those were the earliest mentions of it are actually from Zoroastrianism. In fact, the fire temples are still there, even though the Ayatollah came in with a very radical kind of a hardline Islam. They kept the fire temples going. They still have I think the original. It's over 2,000-3,000 years that supposedly that this fire, this Nur Tamid is what we call it in Judaism, but that thing keeps going, and it's still there in Persia. They wouldn't touch it. So that Zoroastrianism is still strong in that region. And it was very much based on kind of a law. This is a judgment, a law, an equal law, and that sort of thing. That gave rights to individuals as well as the rulers. So it kind of balanced that out versus, you know, that sort of thing. So those concepts were there. And usually in the West, we don't associate those concepts with anything, you know, usually west of the Mississippi, but, you know, in this case, over and, you know, the East Coast, they're kind of goofy. But anyway, that's usually what we think of that as originating in Greece, but it really didn't. It kind of, or some people would say in Jerusalem or Greece, but those were farther afield, farther back than most people realize, those core concepts.
I mean, if you go back to the ancient Assyrians, and, you know, ancient Assyrians taught everybody language. They taught everybody economics. They taught everybody, you know, a lot of the folks that were in the region really were taught by the ancient Assyrians, from their religious perspective and also from their legal perspective, laws that were used here specifically, or in their doctrine, whether it be theology or anything else that they've, you know, adapted to, taught them how to read or write, taught them how to envision the concepts of a statehood. You know, I know that a lot of times people say that, you know, ancient Assyrians were bloody, like were constantly in fights and battles. You know, historically they're looked at as being even in the past as you know, enemies who suppressed the you know, what is modern day state of Israel and their ancestors. No, Assyrians were very practical. It's like, hey, I need to keep this node that the Hittites and the Egyptians were fighting over open, because I need to make sure that my economy is flowing through the area. The Assyrians had conquered Egypt a long time ago, but when Assyria was about to fall and was under attack by other regional players, even the Egyptians, who actually would fund, some would say, today's modern insurgency campaigns against the Syrians in Assyria. They're like, wait a minute, we can't just have this empire fall. It's going to be devastating for our economic realities. Even they, at that time, when they saw the possibility of the fall of the Syrian empire, actually sent force structures to link up with whatever were the remnants of the Syrian military units that were outside of the empire when the city main capitals were being sacked, especially in Syria, to be able to counterattack and maybe help the Syrians reclaim their place within what would be the future of the region, because they understood that, you know what, the empire may fall, but these individuals have the economic bazaar that has been controlled by them, and they know exactly how, that line of communication and the trade needs to remain open in order for us as Egypt, a counter to them, still to be able to survive. So, and I think that's the closest thing I could kind of tie into as far as what the bazaar for the Persian, the future Iran would look like, and is necessary to maintain if you are going to have a viable Middle East that is capable of really um, uh, having positive effects on not just regional players, even our near peers that are really much need that particular piece of terrain and what comes out of it to sustain themselves over the long term, at any economic level. So, look, you have various different factions. You have Kurds, you have Azadi Turks. They're always going to fight against each other. You have Kurds that will fight against each other. In the Jangil Mountains of Iraq, Kurds were killing each other to the tune of 50,000 until Madar Albright put them on the table and said, "Look, you can't just be killing each other. We need you guys to kind of work together for us to be able to have a way to at least have some effects within the region." The Arabs are a completely different, ideology is tribal. Iranians are not tribal. They were members of an empire before. Even my people, the Syrians, are global. We've survived thousands of years after the fall of the empire. We're all over the map, from Senegal all the way to Europe, to United States, to the Middle East, to even China. We understand what being an empire is. We have the historical background, what it takes to run an empire. A lot of the stuff that I would see is happening in the United States with the internal fightings and some of the issues that even Americans scratch their heads and go, "What the hell's going on to our country?" Um, I could understand why, because I've been a member of an empire in the past. What you're going through is nothing more than what our folks went through historically a long time ago. So it's easier for me to kind of look at patterns and go, yeah, these things happen as empires try to, as empires expand, and also, of course, lose a little bit of a footprint on the global stage. But I think whoever is going to be in Iran is going to be a person from that region. He has to be an individual that possibly right now is sitting somewhere in a prison, Iran prison, probably in Iran, who has had a stake in this fight for years under the Islamic Republic of Iran, who probably is going to be individual who's going to emerge, who's going to know exactly how to control that market, and then also control the internal politics and squeeze these different tribal groups to be more Iranian focused and loyal than it's their tribal groups or their tribal, connections that is going to allow Iran to stay a whole. Otherwise, the whole place will fall apart. And I don't think bringing an outsider is going to be able to reset anything in a positive way for that country.
Wow. So having somebody that had skin in the game that remained in Iran throughout that would be the better choice, because they're more in tune with that market, those market forces, that inertia from the market, which pretty much drives the rest of Iranian kind of society and culture.
Yeah, and people say, well, that would mean that you may have to work with somebody who was a member and worked with the previous regime. Listen, When we went into Germany, we didn't kill every Nazi, and we didn't kill every German that we fought against. We actually brought Nazi scientists back to the United States, Operation Paperclip, and we gave them new identities. And then we said, "Here's some money. We need the knowledge in your brain. Why don't you go teach in our universities?" Might not have been the best choice, but and then we wonder why our kids are communists who don't like the United States today. Here, why do we take you as a fascist guy? Put you in
Mm.
a university and say teach our future generations. And same thing when we went in, we didn't kill everybody who was part of the SS Panzer, Waffen SS guys on the battlefield. Some of those guys surrendered. What did we do? We picked them up, we brought them to the United States, and a lot of them were recruited and put into the U.S. Special Operational Forces. And why did we do that? Because we were fighting against Russia at that time, or the Soviet Union, I should say, that with split Germany, and those are the individuals we were able to send back behind enemy lines to be able to survive there and be able to be one of our major, intel folks that we use for our benefit. So we actually took individuals who served under Hitler, who were loyal to him, who killed many of the people that we were trying to save in the region, and we took those guys and put them in our special operational units. What Mossad does today on the battlefield is nothing that our special operational forces or special forces can do. The issue is we don't recruit first generation or zero generation and bring them in and use them for our benefit. It's not easy to take a guy who's a German guy, drop him off in the middle of Iran and say, "Here, go survive," and set up an insurgency and negotiate, a footprint for the United States against IRGC system that runs a bazaar. So it'll be get killed in a heartbeat. But if I can bring somebody from Iran and put them in that U.S. Military network, train them, and then send them back, then this individual can be an absolute asset for me. I could have one special operator from that community, from that region, operating behind enemy lines, or maybe a handful of individuals that are anti-regime folks, and I can now say, okay, we're in war, and here's a bomber from the United States with 4,200 pounds of ordnance on it. Have your field day. And he could probably kill, battalions of folks and aircraft that is also has AI integrations in it, and absolutely do massive damage to the Iranian military structures on the ground, which is the reason why we've been so successful in this battle, and is why we're going to be successful even against a near peer in China in the long term. So there are tech abilities and our abilities to be able to have those type of individuals gives us an option. I give you an example of when I was in Iraq, my first tour, and we are constantly getting blown up. The Marines wanted me to go with them. Their civil affairs unit wanted my team to go with them because they were having a problem with a contractor doing work in an area which was heavily controlled by the insurgents at the time. And I told them, well, you just pay the guy. You want him to do the work, just pay him. Like, well, it's not just that easy, our contractual obligations. I'm like, listen, dude, just pay him. Otherwise, don't waste your time getting on the road and going to have a discussion and meeting with this guy. Well, I found out that, they were told you have to go. And, at that time, there were a lot of attacks against the convoys that were operating in Al-Anbar. I asked my team, I said, let's just go with them. Let me see what I can do. I show up to a meeting. The Marines are having a discussion with this contractor. They're not understanding anything he's saying. I've sat down with him. I said, listen, just have be comfortable about what we're saying, telling to you. You will eventually get all your money. Just do what we're asking you, if possible. And then he goes, well, there's no guarantees. What am I going to do? Is all falls on me. I said, and then I tap my neck, and I said, don't worry about it. It's on my neck, okay? And then he goes, but what about the possibility of me getting the final pays? I need money to be able to do these construction. I'm like, listen, I understand there's a process we do, but don't worry about it. I guarantee you'll get your money. He said, how's that possible? And I grabbed my mustache, which means by my manlyhood. And he goes, okay. And then that was it, our discussion. I came back and got woken up that evening by my commander, who was with CG Sodif at the time. He goes, "Hey man, I'm getting the word that you went over there. Actually, didn't want to freaking support the Marines and their endeavor, and nothing was agreed upon afterwards." I said, "No, that's not true. Just have him show up on Monday. If you want to fire me, you can fire me after Monday, but he's going to be working." So when the Marines showed up on Monday, there's folks digging and doing construction. And when the Marine commander called me in, he said, "What the hell did you say to this guy?" Because I didn't get anything, bro. I said, "Well, I told him it's on my neck," because that took the pressure off of him, because I knew the guys that were standing behind him were the insurgents. And then I said, "Don't worry about my manlyhood." I made a promise to him. And you have to understand what these mean if you're going to operate in that environment. And he understood that I understood the issues that he was dealing with. So he got to work. It was without having to sign a piece of paper, we made a contract. And the contract was by me grabbing my mustache and saying, "If anything happens, then you could kill me. Don't worry about it. It's not on you." Those are the type of individuals you need to be able to operate in these type of behind enemy lines in these areas. And do we recruit these guys? No. The first tour I went to, when I was there in Alambar, I worked with the 5th Special Forces Group, Navy Tasking Unit, and 1st Special Forces Group. We had one guy who spoke Arabic well enough to be able to communicate. The rest of them, were if so, and the Iraqis spoke English. That's not going to win you an ability to be behind lines. And when the Ayatollah gets killed, 5 seconds later, you're taking a picture of him and sending it, uploading it, so that the coalition forces know that he's been killed. And that those guys can operate in that atmosphere without getting killed or being compromised. Anybody else cannot, and our systems are right now not even set up to be able to operate that way.
Unfortunately, our force structures, has a requirement for a certain set amount of Georgetown info bunnies to be within, running anything. So we're just going to leave it at that. Georgetown needs its alumni built up or something with with resume builders. But yeah, I agree. I think we talked about that earlier, that the current model seems a bit disjointed. That something simpler, like kind of what the historical OSS, performed those, and the streamlined organizational structure had a little bit better results without a lot of blowback.
You have to go back to that model, Al. You have to go back to the OSS model. The agency, as it's currently structured, it's just not structured. You go ask the agency guys, are you structured in a way you can be able to win wars and be able to have effects? And they'll be like, no. How many times have OGAs won any wars for us? Zero. The only thing that our spies and Soviet Union had in common, all of them were either compromised or killed. That's not a winning track record. And I think going back to an OSS structure is what probably is going to help us in the long term. And I think the current POTUS is probably looking at something like that. Hopefully he can get it done in the next 3 years. But the positive about the operations we're doing, the Department of Defense has just basically said to the OGAs, "Shut up, sit there, let us handle this." And look how efficient this battlefield is, and what happens afterwards, that's still something to be questioned.
Yeah, I think, and for people that are watching this on Substack, there's another page. It's Charles Faddis, Faddis, Charles Faddis, and he was a former station chief with the CIA, and then he retired, and he wrote actually a number of books about getting back to that streamline model, about the OSS kind of organizational structure, because organizational structure dictates outcome. Your intent will only carry you so far, but that organizational structure, that inertia is what really carries it into the end zone. And then he wrote at length about that. And he's from the inside, he came at pretty much the same conclusion that you did, that going back to the OSS model is far better, because it's just too burdensome, it's too bureaucratic, and it's too separated from the nations that you're there. You need to recruit those human sources in there, and then they understand that dynamic that you're talking about. So let's go back a little bit to and I put a little thing out there. We should be getting some questions in here. So I'm gonna be looking down. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just seeing, because sometimes it won't pop up here. It'll only pop up on my phone if people have questions. But going back to the Assyrian thing, so walk us through your story. So you are an Assyrian Christian that was born in Iran. So kind of walk us from that, a little bit of your family history, and then forward. And how'd you end up in Chicago? With the land of the deep dish pizza, which is amazing. So how did this journey happen? So,
well, the first Assyrian ever land in the United States, what today is the United States, actually came over here on the Mayflower. I met his descendants. I think it was like 17 years ago here in Chicago, but I haven't talked to them. I have no clue where they are right now. But actually, we've had Assyrians who actually came here. Well, so I was born in Iran at the time. I don't think people know, but the middle class in Iran under the Shah was absolutely amazing. The same middle class that today is the bazaar, of Iran, except for the fact that at that time we were supporting the Shah, and now they're supporting the Islamic Republic of Iran. But a middle businessman in Iran could get up in the morning, eat breakfast at his house, fly to Paris, go shopping, maybe have a late dinner or a early lunch, and then fly back and be sleeping in his bed by the evening.
wow.
I had a cousin of mine that I saw one time light up not a cigar, a cigarette with $100 US bill at the time. You go tell me how many freaking Americans at the time could light up a cigarette with $100. Their parents would probably shoot them. So Iran had absolutely advanced when it came to education and money, and a lot of the Iranian middle class would send their kids here to the United States to study. Where did they go to study? They went to MIT. They went to Berkeley. The Iranian Air Force actually was trained in at the Air Force Academy. The Iranian military officers were trained at West Point. So Iran, even the rial was at one time 10 to 12 amongst world currencies. And the Iranian education system was even seen maybe possibility around the fifth best. Even Trump mentioned it recently. He said that there were more educated Iranian women at the highest professional levels than there were even in the United States, and the levels that they ran the country. So when we first initially came to the United States, we came for a visit. My dad has his sister who was living here. My two cousins had actually served in Korean War in Vietnam. One of my cousins was an Annapolis graduate. He actually suffered from the effects of Agent Orange and just passed away a couple of years ago. He was a Naval Academy graduate. And the first tour I went to in Iraq on a combat deployment, I actually carried his dog tags with me. Now, but we first came to the United States, and when we came here, his sister convinced him, said, look, if the kid's going to come here to be educated, why don't you just get their green cards anyway and come live with us and come be with us? And my dad made that decision. He said, why not? I got lands in Iran. I could always go back and maintain those. And we had $1 million worth of US dollar lands in Iran. Even as Christians, were able to historically, be advanced. My name is Singiri. And the village that my grandfather, held and controlled and ran was Senget. So we were actually named after our village. The I ending makes a Persian ending because in World War I, when the first genocide took place, our grandfather wanted to make sure that we always remembered that we initially were in Iran a long time ago before the Christians were pushed out under the first genocide conducted by the Ottomans and the Kurds against the Syrian Christians. With that said,
expand on that a little bit more. So your location, are we talking like northeast?
Northeast Iran. The Azerbaijan territory, correct. And Northeast Iran is funny because at home I spoke Assyrian, in the streets you spoke Turkish Azadi, in the schools they taught you Persian. So you were multilingual by the time you came here to the U.S. So my father puts all our paperwork at the embassy in Tehran. We're ready to to go, and the revolution starts. So when the Tehran embassy that gets taken over, all our documents get burned. So we had to rebuild all the documents. So we did get a chance to, through the green card process, to get to the United States, with my sisters initially being, my two older sisters being left here for a number of years. The rest of the family had to go back to make sure that we were able to finish up our paperwork and qualify. So me, my mother, my brother, my father went back, and then of course, a couple of
Went
years
back to
later,
Iran.
yeah, to Iran, and a couple of years later, we came back we came to the United States.
Now,
My
how
father,
was that? So, I
go
mean,
ahead.
so there's the revolution. So the Islamic revolutions occurred. You guys were getting ready to come to America even before that a little bit.
Yes,
And then you came here. The sisters, their paperwork was squared away. They stayed, but yours wasn't. So you guys went back to
cor-
Iran
correct. We went back
under
after
the
we dropped
Islamic,
them off. Yeah,
wow, under the Islamic regime of the
yeah,
Ayatollahs. And
yeah.
then that must have been tense.
Well, I
So,
mean,
wow.
that I mean, I was there. The whole thing was just a, when you live through a revolution, it's just a ghost show.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember when uh, my there was my dad had a when everybody's just killing each other, everybody's different factions are fighting each other. My dad had a friend who was a doctor, and then we get a phone call, or he gets a phone call, and keep in mind, folks, there's no cell phones at the time. It's landlines, and landlines sometimes didn't work. But he gets a phone call and says, the wife of his friend, "Hey, I haven't heard from him for at least 24 hours. I know he was at the hospital taking care of the wounded and what's happening. Could you please find out what's going on?" So my father, who had students who had studied underneath him, some of the students were pro Shah and others were, pro revolution. They show up together. These are the individuals who are fighting each other in the streets. They show up because my dad, their teacher, says, "Hey, we got to go find this guy," and they work together to try to go find where this doctor is. And by sheer luck, and it's a dangerous time. Everybody's getting shot wherever you're going. They end up seeing a checkpoint and see his car, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Why is his car here? And nobody's speaking. Bunch of teenagers were actually running that checkpoint. And then this is important why you have to tie into different networks, right? So the pro Shah guy isn't getting anything out from him, and the pro Khomeini guy or pro revolution guy basically roughhouses one of the teenagers. Says, "Where is this guy?" Because my dad noticed that that young man had something that belonged to him in his pocket, and they're like, "Well, he was drinking, which is against Islamic law." So he was sent back to the station to be interrogated. So they go find the station to see what's going on. Actually, he wasn't interrogated in the station because they had also seen blood splatter next to the car. So some teenager who didn't know that this poor doctor was working on wounded, and he smelled like ether because somebody told him that alcohol is najas, ends up shooting a doctor, not understanding the difference between what ether smells like and what alcohol smells like. And here's a doctor trying to save the lives of these people, to include possibly him if he was shot, during the revolution.
Hmm.
They find the body of the doctor. It's sitting on ice. Guess what? He's still alive. So they
Wow.
go and try to get the paperwork to get the body out, to get somebody from the hospital, his other colleagues, to be able to come and save him. And a mullah comes in and he sees there's a guard standing next to the body, and he says, "Why is why are you guarding that body?" They're like, "Well, there's people. He's still alive, trying to get his body out." They had taken his body out because the mullah said, "Execute him again," and shot him, without ever even asking what the consequences of why are they trying to save this person. These are the type of, this is what you were dealing with during the revolution. And here you
Wow.
are as a teenage kid, or why am I saying teenage? I was like 9 and 10 when I left. And you don't even know if your dad is coming back alive or not,
Hmm.
during those type of operations. So we, fast forward, I'm here in the United States now with my mom and my brother and my sisters. My sisters are like 2 years advanced. They're their level of English capacity is better than mine, given the fact that I didn't know what no or yes meant. If you told me no, yes, I'm like, what does that mean? Does that mean Jello? And
But wait, have you still figured it
yeah,
out?
yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out. That's why I talk so much. So and my father's stuck in Iran because they're not letting him leave because the government of Iran wants to work against his community. And he's like, I'm not working against my certain community. So he was somewhat under house arrest because they knew he was influential in the city, and he was tapped into both the revolutionary network because of the fact that he had educated these kids, and the old Iranian network, which was pro Shah. And
Question for you. So you mentioned that there was some your dad was under house arrest. Now, was it a consequence of him being Assyrian or Assyrian Christian specific? Like whether
consequences of him being in a certain Christian who had influence. If he didn't have influence, I don't think they would have cared. But he was influential. I mean, he taught everybody in our. He was a physics professor, and he taught everybody basically in Iran, and especially in our city. Everybody knew him. To this day, people know me as the son of Rabbi Coolidge. Because they all remember, oh, okay, he was our teacher. That's how they know me. That's their reputation. So my dad's there. I'm in the United States. I have a hard time talking to my sisters, let alone, I mean, even if you have daughters and sons in your family, you know how teenagers sometimes argue. Imagine when you have a guy, who's now the lead of the house, where his dad isn't there. I barely, have hit 12 years old. And, I can't even communicate with my sisters because they're on another planet when it comes to just their uh, cultural ideology now being in the United States for a number of years, and their linguistic capacity. And me and my mom didn't even, communicate when it came to understanding each other because my mom is taking our responsibilities that she really didn't have under the in our family structure when she was back in Iran. And now she was a teacher also, and she was recognized by the Shah of Iran because of her ability to teach her students. And she was the only Christian woman that was actually invited to the palace of the Shah to be recognized. And there's a lot of controversy why is she being recognized when you had all these Muslim teachers could have been recognized. And just to add to that, my younger brother, who's really not confused about which side to pick, my mom had been given a humongous book, and from the king himself, unique, one in a 25. And when the revolution was taking place, my brother being young, he's like, oh, the Shah is a bad guy. No concept in his head. You talk about 6 to 7 year old. So he has sat down and tore all the pages off of this historical book because my mom's like, what are you doing? He's like, well, the Shah is bad. I'm supposed to tear these things out. What were you going to do? Beat the crap out of a 6-year-old? I mean, you do what you can. And now I'm in the States, and I'm trying to negotiate through through this process. And the reason this story is important for people to understand what happens. And I'm an illegal immigrant, right? I'm not an illegal immigrant. I just come in. I'm a legal immigrant who's here.
Well, you guys had actually returned to Iran in the revolution to make it legal. You weren't going to stay here and just do it. You actually
we actually did it to make it legal. Correct.
To make it legal before you came back.
My dad always made sure you do everything legally. So we're here. And I remember, as I'm growing up, I remember same brother who was tearing up the Shah's picture one day. I come in and I'm like, there's an American flag, and this is where my dad isn't even back in the States. There's an American flag sitting in our post box. Like, what the hell is an American flag doing sticking out of our post box? So I walk in and I go, hey, what's going on with the U.S. flag in our post box? And my brother's like, well, today is the American Independence Day. I'm like, what? I had no clue what a 4th of July was. I had no clue what American. I'm living in America. I have no clue. I'm like, what is that? He's like, well, today was when we beat the British. I'm like, the hell are you talking about? Why do we have the flag out there? He goes, well, we got to be proud Americans. I'm like, listen to me. My dad is stuck in Iran. He can't leave. We were millionaires over there. The whole damn thing is falling apart. My mom barely can freaking has to work a number of jobs to be able to feed us, and my sisters and I don't even see eye to eye. I'm like, what friggin'? Because I tied everything that was happening to my family, everything
Mm.
that happened to those certain Christians, everything happened to Iran, to whom? Carter and the U.S. flag. So I go out and I take the American flag out of the post office. I bring it in. I have an argument with my brother. I'm like, I'm not celebrating this. Now I didn't even know what Fourth of July was, but I'm like, I'm not gonna celebrate it. My brother is the one that educated me about it's a Independence Day for the United States. So what happens? I start growing up in the U.S. system, right? My dad eventually comes back. The most formative teenage years that you want your father there to be with you. I miss those. I'm struggling with trying to be a lead for a family in a structural concept of what culturally you do when your father's not there, in a foreign culture that I have no clue about, and I can't even understand it. I mean, I'll give you an example. My mother, for the longest time, wouldn't let us watch, Tom and Jerry. And one day, my cousin comes in. He goes, "Why are you guys not watching TV?" I'm like, I don't know. My mom got mad again. She's like, "You can't watch Tom and Jerry." So he goes, talks to her. He comes back. He's laughing. He's like, "Turn it on. You could watch." Because, in Tom and Jerry, Jerry sometimes says to Tom, "Pussycat." And of course, my mom was equating the word pussycat with something completely, culturally, bad. And, this is, you're trying to figure out this culture you're in, a new culture called the United States and democracy. You don't even know why these are special holidays like a 4th of July or Independence Day for them. I mean, you're associating everything bad that has happened to you in your family structure over the years and people around you and your dad's friends being killed to the screwed up foreign policy of a government in the United States and an inept Carter administration. So I go to high school. I actually high schools at that time would make you write out the entire Constitution test. You didn't just like check boxes. You literally have to write out the Constitution. I scored a higher score in the Constitution test.
Wow.
I was very proud of it. I learned about what the American political systems are. I figured out why Americans the dates are important to them, why they think the way they do. I understood the importance of 4th of July. And when, you read about the fact that on Christmas evening, Washington's going in and killing a bunch of Hessians, I'm like, holy holies, these guys actually are, tough people. And they actually did what they had to do to preserve what became the Constitution of the United States. You read through the, preamble of the Constitution, and then you read the, what the Constitution has. They say, well, this is what people, this is what everybody aspires to. So I spent 20 years in the army. I go to combat. I serve my nation. I, have all these injuries, and this is one of them that I'm still dealing with their most recent surgery. It took me a decade to understand what it means to at least be an American, to fit into this cultural landscape. And then after that, I said, I'm going to dedicate my time for this nation, for what it was able to provide for me, and give me the opportunity to be as successful as possible, where I wouldn't have that right or that ability in Iran. Uh, Here, that's why, again, I would say legal immigration is important. It takes time to kind of incorporate people in your cultural concepts and abilities. And today, like I said, I'm in both worlds, right? I can understand Iran, but I can understand also in the Middle East, but I can understand the U.S. perspective on things, and I'm able to marry those up and be a bridge, and most likely even be a glue between the two cultural concepts. Now, I will tell you today, uh, 20 years, language changes. The words I used to use in Iran to speak Persian is not the same words that are used today in Iran. So the language has completely flipped, and you have to have folks from the region who understand the language much better than even the guys from my generation who have lived there, who have bled there, who have suffered under the Islamic Republic of Iran. And those individuals, I think, if you pick from them, and there's businessmen there. There's a businessman who's currently in prison there. I think he would be a wonderful individual to lead Iran in the future. I'm not going to give his name out because the second you do, Mossad and the OGAs, taint them and he becomes garbage. So we'll let the army guys know who he is. The rest, don't need to know who he is. But I think there's a lot of folks there that can bring and tie into the system and make it work. As I told you, we brought Waffen SS guys here, okay, and we put them in our special units, and they were very much important for us to be able to at least initially counter what the Russians were introducing, especially in East Germany, against our abilities of trying to affect a change there. So the same thing needs to happen within the region, especially in Iran. And I'm sure there's members of the IRGC that would be very much of an important key asset for us in the long term when it comes to us being able to be operational and have a footprint in Iran. Otherwise, the only person and only nation that we can go through would be, in this case, the state of Israel and the Mossad. And as much as we're allies, what the state of Israel tries to do in the region is sometimes contrary to what the United States wants to do in the larger piece when it comes to countering near peers like China. I hope that example helps. I don't know if it does, but it kind of gives you an understanding of.
And a great example of legal immigration. You actually return to the Revolutionary War zone to get it legal and then come back. So if you can do that in the middle of the Islamic Revolution, I'm pretty sure everybody else can go back to Guatemala for a little bit and then come back up here. So,
yeah,
anyway.
Sure.
But that's good. That's a good example. The other one is I'm curious. So how many Assyrian Christians do you think are still left in Iran right now?
The numbers are just dwindled. Certain Christians have left anytime any chance they have. The two positions that the Christians had, which was for the Syrians and Armenians, were actually those positions were under the old parliament by the Shah, designated as ethnic groups that had a seat at the table. So the Islamists came in and they kind of kept that. They didn't change it because they weren't sure initially dynamically how it would go. Actually, a uncle of mine was a Christian representative in Iran for the longest time. Just it was now 4 years ago he stepped back from being that lead. The worry I have today, and I know that even the son of the Shah, Pahlavi, recently on Fox News was interviewed, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't even mention ethnic, minorities. He just said, religious minorities. He said, we're going to give an opportunity for all the religious minorities. Well, that means that you basically been cut off in a future Iran under that leadership, because you basically now again have Shia Islam, and then you have the Sunnis and minorities. And if there's any Christians that are not related to the Assyrian Church, that might have been, Christians that popped up with various different churches, underground churches in Iran. And I have to tell you that that didn't happen by magic. It wasn't like somebody's like, I don't like what Islam's doing to me, I want to convert to Christianity. There was a lot of work by agency to try to expand a possible church footprint, underground church footprint inside of Iran. And now that has grown to 1 million. It's amazing what money can do, and how many preachers you could buy. That's not to taint individuals in Iran who are not Christians, who believe in Jesus Christ. But the initial step to get there was a targeted, driven policy for an underground network to expand that could be trusted, that can be utilized by agency for intel gathering and information for us in the long term, that would be loyal to the U.S. vision, because it shares a Judeo-Christian attitudes from their perspective.
Was that under Reagan, or when did that program start?
That program did not start under Reagan. It started, listen to me, the whole Contra issue was an absolute disaster. And even the Iranians were like, when is he going to get court-martialed? And the fact that it didn't happen, the Iranians who were on the outside in the diaspora were shocked. They're like, this is not going to work well. That means that the Iranian Islamic Republic is going to be entrenched more. And I think because of what happened under Reagan and how it was dealt with, really kind of for a lot of Iranians in the diaspora kind of poison their mind as to whether or not there is ever going to be a change in the Islamic Republic. And from that time, there was a belief that the United States was willing to work with the Iranian Islamic movements, and it did a lot of damage internally in Iran for any counter movement that still existed. So,
Wow.
a lot of people kind of don't understand that, but it wasn't a positive for us. And I think from there has led to all other presidents trying to work with the Islamic Republic of Iran instead of countering it as POTUS is today. Uh,
That,
those programs started more recently.
so
After,
are they
go ahead.
along the lines of the Assyrian Christians or the
No,
Eastern Apostolic churches, or what
no,
flavor of
no.
Christians are there? Because I know there's a lot of
No,
spectrum.
there are certain Christians are there. There are certain Christians that did not go out and recruit Iranians to be part of their churches. That's just not what they did.
Hmm.
There are certain church just for survival sake couldn't do it.
So
Uh,
is it Catholic, or what's the denomination? Because I know there's like a whole bunch of different Christian groups. Which one is that? Is the one that they're promoting in this underground movement?
it it's more of a
Is it like evangelical or
eh,
something? Because they did that in South America for a bit.
yes and no. There's evangelical vision to it, but it's maybe a more of a moderate evangelical
Hmm.
viewpoint on the church.
So it's not something historically to the area. It's
No,
something that's outside of that
the
area.
only thing that was historically to the area was a Syrian church of the
Yeah.
East. That's it. That was it. Under Thomas is and actually in the Bible. That's when it was established. The Christianity in the Middle East, in the Eastern Church, wasn't something that was just practiced in the churches. It was actually in your daily life. You know,
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, we used to, before the revolution, we used to go to celebrate the various different saints' days. So I'm named after Marsyrius. So there was a feast of Marsyrius, and I remember,
Did you say a
uh,
feast of Mars Sargas?
yeah, Marsargus, which is my first name is Sargus, Martyr Sargus. So we're going to celebrate that feast. So we're going to the to the church of Marsargus, to the village to celebrate it. Um, and we would sit on the ground to celebrate that feast, right? So uh, when we would set up the table, or not the table, the supra on the ground, or basically you're laying a linen on the ground in a T-shaped formation. Okay. And only at that time, my dad would talk to me all the time. He would carry me on his shoulders, blah, 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 like we would do here with your kids. But when the feast began, if I wanted to run up to talk to my dad, my uncle would be sitting on his right side or left side, depending on how I ran up to talk to him, would grab me and say, "What do you want?" I'm like, "Well, I want to talk to my dad." "No, you're gonna tell me, and then I'll let your dad know." I'm like, "Why I can't talk to my dad while we're eating?" That makes no sense. And why do I need to tell my uncle this? He's sitting right there next to you. But he'd be like, "No, that's the way it's done. Go sit back. Hey, you can't tell me. You're not going to tell anybody." I never understood that. I'm like, what the hell we do this for? After the feast is done, everything is done. We're heading back, and my dad's talking to me now. I'm like, as a kid, you're like, what is this? He's like, well, that's our tradition. How this is going to be done. Fast forward almost 25 years later. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm sitting down there, I'm going through the Bible, I'm trying to figure out, various different, basically stories, and writings and the various different gospels. And when Christ is at the Last Supper and there's a discussion taking place, and he's like, somebody's going to betray me, so and so. And you start following the discussions that are taking place and how Christ is answering the questions. Everything that is coming to him as a question and an answer is going through the person on his left or his right. And in the Assyrian tradition, there's a saying we always had: you put your best son on your right hand side and the one who's the most troublemaker on your right hand side. If you take a look at the read,
Your best
uh,
and your most troublemaking?
yeah, the troublemaker always on your right hand side. And if you read through the uh, the uh, the Last Supper, and then as a kid, you're like, now I understand why I couldn't talk to Jesus directly at the table, who in this case, my dad was representing him. that I had to go through my uncle who was sitting either on his right or his left. And the conversation that takes place there made sense at that T-shaped table that we would set up on the ground and practice on a daily basis the entire story that was in the biblical stories, whatever the Last Supper or the stories that existed in the Bible. So it was part of the fabric of our society, and we spoke Aramaic, right? So we spoke the language that Jesus spoke. So it made sense.
Mm.
The piece that was missing for the Eastern Christians, it was part of their oral stories. It was Rome because Rome was an empire and had a structure. It was the structure that Rome brought to this process. It was when Rome brought the structure and took those what we used to practice just as tradition, oral tradition, instead of making sure it was lost, was incorporated in what today is our scriptures that we use, and in the structures of the church liturgy. That I don't think if it was without Rome, I don't know if those oral stories would ever exist. Maybe later on we'd be sitting at a circular supra rather than in a T-shaped supra for this particular saints festival that we celebrated.
Wow.
So the infusion of the two, the East and the West, was very important to where Christianity is today. But certain Christians lived it on a daily basis.
Mm.
Hey, there's a reason why when ISIL and ISIS declared war and said we're going to set up the Islamic State in the region, from Syria to Iraq, that they were going after the destruction of the Syrian church. Assyrians before the U.S. invasion into Iraq were 1.5 million, 5% of the population. Today, we're 0.003% of the population, less than 100,000 maybe left in the region.
Whoa.
And there's a reason why ISIS was destroying Assyrian monuments. The winged bulls, or the lamas, as we call them, were destroying the city of Nimrud. They were destroying the gates of Nineveh. And you go, well, what's the tactical reason for ISIS to attack and destroy these things? Because ISIS understood this is a root of Christianity. This is a language Jesus spoke. When you say something in Aramaic, it has a completely different meaning than it is in English. And when you say something in Latin, it has a complete separate meaning than what it has in English, And when you understand it, you understand the biblical history, you understand the nuances of why this church, the Syrian church, expanded Christianity throughout the entire region, all the way to China, Mongolia, Japan, India. And the largest Assyrian church community today is the Indian community, which belongs to the Assyrian Church of the East in the region. So ISIS understood that. They're like, well, if you destroy the root, then all the branches will die off. So we can go and target it. The Americans have a hard time understanding that. That's the reason why the Syrian community never got any support in Iraq, and more likely it's not going to get any support even in Iran in the long term. And so, look, the folks in the region understand the importance of the various different ethnic groups. The folks on the outside, to include somebody you want to bring in, and maybe from outside to lead Iran, may not even understand it.
Wow. So kind of going back over that, because that's something I don't think is discussed over here at all. That there was because you mentioned a genocide earlier, there was a genocide that occurred within the last 10 years, 15 years in Iraq against that area when ISIS and ISIL was pretty much running rampant in that whole area. And you said it went from 1.5 million in Iraq alone down to, what was the number now?
We're 0.003%.
Wow. But you said like 150,000? So we went from 1 million to 100,000.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Assyrian Christians left. They left Iraq. And two things happen in war. Either you're dying in war or you're having sex and producing babies. So that's the demographic reality of what happened in war. And the Iraqi population exploded by 20% when that happened. And as it's exploded, basically, the Christian numbers for the Syrians, became marginalized. There's more Afghans and Pakistani people in Iraq than there's Assyrians today. And if
Oh,
but again, if you dig underground, anything you
and
pull out is a Syrian monument. There's
this was
nothing.
the last 20 years,
Yeah, this is the last decade plus. Yeah,
10 years. So the last
yeah,
10 years, and America didn't do anything. America's like, eh.
yeah. You couldn't do anything. That's why when people say, "Oh, Americans going to come and save the Iranian people," we had sieges of Delta operators. We had multi force structures. We had the surge. We had the Europeans. We had NATO. We had Georgians. We had even the Japanese, on the ground. And Syrian Christians were getting massacred, and nothing was left of them. Oh, today, one of the leads of the Hashishabi, which is an Iranian line militia, just got possibly killed. I'm trying to get confirmation if this person was killed or not. And when we were fighting against ISIS, and I was fighting the Assyrian force structures in both Iraq and Syria, um, when we went to the State Department and we're like, here's what we've done, they were shocked because they were trying to put some kind of a force structure for Christians, a protection unit. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. They said, well, for us to support you, the only way you could get support, you have to be under the what we're trying to get rid of now, and we tried to get rid of for the past, um, 15 years, which was the militias that were under the Iranian line militia influence. So they wanted us to actually join the Hashishabi to be able to get U.S. dollars to the central government to them. They're like, well, we can't fund you directly, but I can fund you through it. But yeah, I'm like, are you crazy? I'm not going to do that. And it's funny because when we're at that meeting at the State Department, when the young lady asked, and I go, okay, we could do that. And her head actually turned like 90 degrees. She's like, really? I'm like, listen to you. You're freaking, it was such a shock to you that your entire head turned and you're like, I can't believe these people are going to do this. No, we're not going to do it. Are you crazy? And today, the United States is bombing the same Hashishabi that they wanted us to be under. So that means a certain Christian will be getting bombed. The stupidity of the stuff that comes out of the states sometimes in the U.S. government is, cannot be underestimated.
My goodness. So going back to the Assyrian numbers, so the numbers were deep. Last 10 years, it was depopulated in Iraq. They kind of wiped that out because that's
Yep.
the early, I guess, the early Christian thing. Now, global numbers of Assyrian Christians. How many do you think are in the global diaspora of Assyrian Christians?
We're all over the planet. We're everywhere.
Do you have a number? Is there like an
I,
estimate? Or?
the last kind of a unrecognized and outside of the census, official census counts, were somewhere around maybe at least 6 million who would say that both parents are Assyrian, and and the kids are Assyrian. But that number could be easily north of maybe 10 million. Possible. I mean, we're like I told you, you go to Africa, Senegal, you run into Assyrians. You go to South America, you run into Assyrians. The Assyrian community in Panama that I didn't get a chance to go and see. And they're not like in places where they're like some dude, with a house. You're talking about individuals within structures. I mean, and if you want to buy Volvos, the top CEO of the Volvo in China is an Assyrian guy. And I know the father who baptized him who's here in Chicago. So and we're all over the place. Look, Assyrians have always had an effect on the history of that region. Iraq would not have been established if the Assyrians hadn't established it. We were actually the levies and the that fought under the British, military force structures that literally created the borders of Iraq. Of course, and the British betray you, and you end up getting massacred too. We fought just against the Turks. We fought 5 major campaigns, 23 battles, and we were outnumbered 1 to 10 to 1 to 32 in some of the battles, and we won them all. This is what happens when you come from an empire that used to whoop everybody's ass. So at least we're good on the battlefield. Before World War One, before the World War I genocide, if a Kurd went into the Turkey and killed a under the Ottomans and killed a Ottoman vizier, and he escaped into the Assyrian territories, the Ottoman Empire would have to ask permission to come in there. They couldn't just come in,
Wow.
and poke the hornet's nest. So after the fall of the empire, of course, the Assyrians established along the Hekati Mountains their stand. Of course, the first genocide in the 20th century takes place, and Assyrians actually lose 2/3 of their people. We're the only ones who lost a actually national leader, which was in this case Mar Binyamin, who was a religious and the secular leader for the Assyrian community and the Assyrian people in the Assyrian church, and he was killed by Simku, a Kurdish, Kurdish Agha, who killed him and actually assassinated him after a peace meeting that took place, where he was warned that please don't go to the peace meeting. I don't think the Kurds are our allies. They were working with the Ottomans at that time, and a lot of the genocide. People say, why don't the Kurds have a country? Why weren't they given a country after World War One? Because they conducted the major portions of the genocide against those certain people. If you go and look at the Kurdish numbers and say, okay, was your grandmother Muslim Kurd or was she a Syrian Christian? 6 out of 10 will tell you that their grandmother was a Syrian Christian. She didn't become a Kurd because she wanted to be, join the Muslim Kurdish community. Because after you killed the husbands and the wives, you took the women and you raped yourself into, millions, million person generation of the future, and the one piece about what happened with the Ottomans. You get when we had the Sochi Olympics in Russia, the Russians had wanted that area long time before World War One, and what they did was they conducted attacks there. They went against the Muslims that lived in Sochi, the tribesmen. The ones who were not massacred escaped. Where did they escape? They escaped into the Ottoman areas. What happened? Decades later, they actually became viziers and top individuals in the Ottoman government. So when the massacre takes place against the Armenians, the Pontus Greeks, and the Syrians, really the main drivers behind that massacre are these individuals who themselves were massacred by the Russians, and genocide that were taking a toll against the Christians that were living under the Ottoman Empire at the time. Now, that doesn't mean that the Ottomans were not responsible for it. The Turkish government at the end of the day was the reason the genocide took place. But you could see the link analysis, right, of how one genocide led to a displacement of people who became part of a Ottoman government and who actually were very much the main drivers of the first genocide of the 20th century against Christians that bore the blunt of what happened to them and their ancestors in the long term. So the Assyrians go through this genocide, and fast forward World War II. After we have established the basically nation of Iraq, the British betray us. There's a book called The Smallest Ally. We're still serving in the British military. I don't know if maybe your older audiences will know. There's a film called The Guns of Navarone,
Oh
where
yeah.
so Guns of Navarone. There's a special unit from the British military that goes in, and conducts an attack and takes out those guns, which allows the underbelly basically to be opened up against the Axis forces. Well, that wasn't a Syrian unit. The team leader was actually married to a Greek woman, and
Probably remarkably like Harrison Ford, if I
yeah,
remember correctly.
yeah, he was married to a Greek woman, and it was Assyrians who were like, "Oh, we know the terrain. This actually, if we take out these guns, it opens up the underbelly." But the British, of course, took the credit for it because you're not going to say it was a group of Assyrian levies who did this. They're like a bunch of British soldiers conducted this operation. There was a and I can't even remember. It's I have to look it up. It's somewhere on the YouTube. I think if your folks Google search it, and maybe because I'm getting old, my memory fades me. But there was a stronghold that the Germans had held for 2.5 to 3 years, and the Allies had tried to break that stronghold, and they couldn't. So
Hmm.
they're like, you know what? We'll bring the Syrians levies, see if they can do something about it. So the Syrian paratroopers jump in with a small number of Kurds assigned with them, and Assyrians jump in. There was supposed to be naval gunfire that would go in to soften the German positions. The Syrians jump in. The paratroopers are like, "Let's go," and they go up. And before even the guns get to them, and they take over the entire, they take the entire stronghold,
Wow.
and the only casualties that were going to be suffering would be from the Allied naval gunfire that was coming in after they had taken the stronghold. And like, stop firing at us! For God's sakes, we did it. And the Allies were like, "How the hell is that even possible?" Because 3 years we had been, dropping special units up there. They can get their ass handed to them, but you were able to do it. And in World War II, folks need to know before there was even you had India. You didn't have Pakistan at that time. So
Right.
the of course, Rommel's handing everybody their ass in the desert, and the British like, hey, we have to get out of here. At the time, you had uh, five Assyrian generals, more like a colonel rank, but they were
Hmm.
referenced as generals under the leadership of a British colonel. And he's like, okay, here's the deal. We're leaving. We got to DD Mao out of here. We're leaving basically Iraq. And the Australians are like, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, we're leaving. All the boats are filled up. We're heading down to India. And the
Whoa.
Australians like, well, we can't leave our people here. And they're like, well, you're assigned to the British military. You have no choice. Your assets, your soldiers. That's what's going to happen. So the five generals get together. They're like, okay, we know what to do. They go up to the colonel and they go, we highly encourage you to rethink that, sir. It's like, I'm ordering you to do this. And one of the generals takes out his gun, puts it around to the British colonel's head. It's like, I'm in charge. We're not leaving. Now, the problem with the British had was the guy that they put in charge after they betrayed the Assyrians, the king that they put in charge of Iraq, actually said, yeah, you know what? I want to hedge my bets with the Germans. So I'm going to join the Germans. Why did he join the Germans? When the Germans were having issues with trying to get into, they needed oil, right? They went into actually into Russia. Also, part of it was because they wanted the resources of oil. There was an Armenian that was in the general staff of the German military, and he's like, "Why are we going to Russia? There's oil in Mosul." Which is northern Iraq. Let's just go take that oil and those oil fields. So the Germans were planning on an operation to get there. So their reach to the Iraqi king at the time that initially the British had installed was, hey, listen, we're going to come over there. We're going to take the oil, work with us. And of course, part of it would be to push the British out. British are getting their ass handed to them in Africa. Now you have the king in Iraq who has said, I'm going to go ahead and join the Nazis. The Nazis are getting ready to come in and take the oil fields of Mosul. And the British are like, we got to get at it. We got to reconstitute our force structures in India. Maybe in the future we can conduct counterattacks here, but it's not going to happen. And
Hmm.
those five Assyrian generals like, nah, it's not going to happen. So they kill him, and the Assyrians have to go now to where Fallujah, the Battle of Fallujah, takes place. Right, they cross the river, and they're light infantry, and the king of Iraq is sending force structures, armored force structures, to try to destroy the Assyrian military remnants that are remaining in order to be able to, of course, take the entire country, open up the gateway to the Mosul oil fields for the Germans to come in and basically take their oil. And the Germans have been able to do that. They may not had even gone into Russia because of it. So the Assyrians hold a line. The first tank that is coming over the bridge, their sharpshooter takes out the basically driver of the tank, kind of a tease, and everybody is blocked off. The rest of the infantry is getting picked off by the Syrian sharpshooters. They have to try to, DD back to try to find a force site, and the Syrians are trying to find a force site where they can maybe block them from, crossing those areas. So in this case, what happens with the Iraqi forces? The Iraqi forces have recruited at this stage also Yazidis. Yazidis went through a genocide in the 2015, 2014 duration, a horrendous genocide against them. And the Yazidi leadership that is within the Iraqi force structure now goes, hey, who the hell are we going to fight? Are we fighting the British, or who are we fighting? And the general says, no, we're fighting the Assyrians because they're fighting on behalf of the British forces. And the Yazidis are like, what are you talking about? We're like, we're historically, tied to the Assyrians. We're not going to go fight the Assyrians. And then an argument starts in the Iraqi camp as they're trying to figure out how to forge. And then the Assyrians who are on this other side of the river in Fallujah area, they hear this, absolute crazy firefight taking place. So they decide they're going to forge with their force structures, light infantry forward to see what's happening. They get to a site and they see, just a decimated Iraqi forces that the king had sent to try to get rid of the Syrians all over the place. They link up with the Yazidis. They go, what happened here? It's like, well, they told us they were going to come kill you guys, and we decided we're not happy about it. Firefight ensued, and we killed the Iraqi military force structure that had augmented us in it. So the Assyrians like, okay, good, let's go take Baghdad. And the Assyrians and the Yazidis go in and start freaking destroying their way all the way into Baghdad to sack Baghdad and take Baghdad away from the Germans now, which means that you've now countered and you blocked the Germans from being able to take the Mosul oil fields. The only mistake they made, they went ahead and telegraphed the British, who are now, running away to get to India. And they say, hey, listen, we're about to take Baghdad. And the British say, do not go into Baghdad. We're going to come and we're going to support you. We're going to help you. Please don't go into Baghdad. Don't sack it. The Assyrians say, okay, they've taken most of it, really. All they had to do is topple the rest of the city. They hold their forces. And then next thing you know, if you look at the old historical movies, the British soldiers were able to take Baghdad. British comes in, takes Baghdad, and takes credit for it. They don't take no credit about, they give no credit to the Assyrian levies, who absolutely devastated the entire German plan to take the Mosul oil fields. So the Assyrians have always been there, have always supported and been the glue, have always changed historical realities that would have been completely different in the region, but they've never been given credit for it. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, now you're 0.003% of the populace in Iraq. And for those who wanted to know, initially when Iraq was established, every time they did the census, the first census that were run, the Assyrians were 75% of the total population of Iraq. And then they do another census, the Assyrians are 65% of the total population of Iraq. So what happens? Genocide happens. 1933 genocide happens. And then finally, when the Assyrian numbers are below the combined numbers of the Kurds, the Turkmen, and also the Arabs, that's when they say, okay, this is a census we're going to go ahead and claim and put on the books. The Assyrians are a minority or a majority, and we have the right to rule the nation. Otherwise, you would have had a Christian Assyrian nation on the rule of the Assyrians, who are Western looking, tied to the Judeo-Christian belief, and you wouldn't have to worry about an Islamic Republic of Iran. You wouldn't have had to worry about, Saddam. You wouldn't have to have worried about ISIS. But the British decided otherwise, and today Britain is suffering the consequences. And I don't think there's one Assyrian guy who's shedding a tear for what is happening inside of Britain. You sow the seeds, that you're suffering from today.
Because that demographic warfare sounded like it occurred in the Middle East against the Assyrian Christian group. So there's actually a question down here from Black Wolf 008. Says, do Assyrians have a homeland?
No.
I mean, you're from the area. Yeah. Why is there no homeland there? And I mean, the State Department, sound like the U.S. State Department wouldn't even help you against a genocide So much less a homeland. But is there a homeland? And if not, why not?
No, I mean our homeland is northern Iraq. But what is considered disputed area between the Kurds and the Iraqi government, and even under the Iraqi constitution, technically, we can have our own region to administer. But just like the Kurds were given a region to administer in northern Iraq, which they call Kurdistan, others call the Iraqi Kurdish North. But uh, U.S. government didn't even support us in our effort to be able to push the Iraqi government to give us the same resources, capacities, capabilities to basically control our own area in northern Iraq. Look, there's a lot of fear for the Syrians to be there. And why? Because they actually do have a legal right to own the land. Okay, there's three ways you take over a piece of property. You buy it. We bought Alaska. We bought the Louisiana Purchase. You take it by force. You fight the Mexican-American War, and you're like, this is my territory. I'm holding it. Or you have a historical right to that piece of property. Well, Assyrians have all three. It's just that the world polities don't want to support it because imagine the change that could happen if you have. I mean, I just told you, the Assyrians as a small group defeat the German ability to get in and take over the Mosul oil field, completely change history. The Assyrians are the ones who actually conduct the operation, that in the movie Guns of Navarone. The Assyrians go in and take a major stronghold in Europe, which allows allies to be able to take territories. The Assyrians establish the Iraq as a state, and were significant in defeating a army corps that the Ottomans had that really defeated the Ottomans' ability to do anything. It's just that we're not controllable. The people are controllable at that time from the from the British perspective was, well, we got the Arabs. We had Lawrence of Arabia, who was being successful at this time. We're gonna have those guys because we control them maybe better. Who can control a Christian Assyrian who's independent thinking, who was member of a empire, who's like, what, this is the way it's going to be.
So they support Arab Muslim because they're controllable to some degree more than an Assyrian Christian, so to speak.
Yeah, and are you able to control any of them? No, you can't even control them in your territories today. Yeah. But
so the answer is no homeland and no plans for a homeland or anything, or no support from the United States because
no, it will never. Like, listen, if today I whistle, folks, I advise the Assyrian armed forces to fight against ISIS in 2014 to 2017. So the Kurds who were put in charge of securing the Assyrian Christians and Qamishli and all these other areas in Mosul, when ISIS was attacking, overnight they locked up the weapons of the Assyrian Christians, the Peshmerga did. They got in vehicles and took off. So the Assyrian Christians are like, wake up in the morning, like ISIS is at the door. And we're talking about like Assyrians living in $500,000 US dollar houses. Okay. And now they're refugees. They're running for their life. They're running as ISIS is clearing. Mosul is moving towards Erbil and Duhok. The only reason the Assyrians ran into that territory under the Kurdish control after they were betrayed by the Kurds prior to that attack was because Obama made the decision we cannot allow Erbil and Duhok to fall. So he started strafing with the U.S. Air Force anything that was moving forward. The individuals I talked to in this case that we initially established a Syrian army were basically Imam Khoshaba, who was one of the commanders. He was actually considered the top commander for the Syrian army. Was where he, on the night where all the cities were falling, everybody's just basically running away. There's no Peshmerga forces staying behind to support them. The Iraqi army had gotten into C-130s and flew out to Baghdad, and the Peshmerga is running back towards, to their stronghold in Duhok and Erbil. The guys like, we got to do something. literally, the story is where they're taking off the rings off of their wives, their wedding bands, and their crosses, and they went and sold them, gave them for guns in the market. Took the
Mm.
guns and started moving forward. So as people are falling back, they're just grabbing folks. Like, here's a gun, just come fight with us. It was a Syrians who established the forward line of troops in that fight just outside of what is the effects of Highway Number Two, and where you have the Erbil and you have Dohuk, and they fought a battle against ISIS, and ISIS stopped.
Mm.
Um, so I came in. They're like, we need advice, we need support from the U.S. Army, we need weapons. I'm like, dude, the U.S. Army ain't giving you no weapons. Are you crazy? I said, they haven't supported you. I said, you've been massacred. I'm like, I wasn't the U.S. Army. I just retired. I ain't getting no support. I said, if you want to get support, here's what you're going to do. We're going to go do operations. And then we're going to go to the State Department if successful, and we're going to say, here's what we've done in the Pentagon. So we conducted operations. We tied into a network. We used even others, the Shia and the Sunni in the network, and Kurds. And Syrian army was in Aleppo and was in the capital, Al Raqqa of ISIS, conducting behind the lines operations before even I think the agency guys were on the ground. And then we did those operations, and then of course after we did the operations, and I was able to do it through our basically 501c3. I didn't take money into my 501c3 and go buy guns. I took the money and I went and gave it to family members of the Assyrian guys who wanted to fight for the Assyrian army as an independent force. I say, here's what you're going to do. I'm going to feed your family. I thought it was like $650 to take care of basically, husband, wife, and a child, but you're going to go fight. And we gave
There was
money.
a genocide going on. ISIS was genociding.
Yeah, it was. So I gave money there. I gave money to them, and he went and fought. And it's asymmetrical warfare. It's like we're gonna go buy a gun for you. It's like, go pick up your gun on the battlefield. Kill the guy. Well, we need oil. Okay, go ambush the trucks that are coming through from ISIS through the south of Sinjar line and going in, and the Kurds were selling them to Turkey for cheap. We were selling them to Europe. They were selling ISIS oil basically to Europe through Turkey. I'm like, go ambush those trucks and take it. So you can fight without having clothes on. The enemy might be more scared when you're running towards the enemy and you're butt naked. I mean, if the issue is to control the territory and fight, that's how you do it. So we actually use that money and we're able to support and sustain that fight. So we went to the State Department and we're like, here's what we've done. The State Department guys were shocked. I actually was able to communicate even targeting packages through CENTCOM with friends that I had just a few months ago. I'm friends with them. Like, hey, but I know you're this fusion cell in CENTCOM. Please, I need some targeting help. He's like, where are you getting this targeting information? I'm like, don't worry about it. You need a safe house in Aleppo. We have it, because the Syrians were all over the map, historically. So I'll even give you an example. The Syrians have always tried to reach out to the West and try to be productive members that can help and support what we believe is the need for our tie-ins, when the West had no concept of what a MiG could do. Nobody had any plans on it, and MiG was outperforming anything that the West had put on the table. And people can Google search it. There was a Iraqi pilot who flew a MiG into Israel. Well, that was an Assyrian guy, and he was given the orders by the Assyrian global governance internally to say, okay, get the MiG to the West so they know what the MiG looks like, so that we can equalize the fight, because the Syrians are always wanting to be Western looking. The Syrians have always been in the process. So what do you do with them? These guys, you try to butcher them, genocide them, try to get rid of them as much as you can, because unfortunately, if you ever give them a piece of territory, they may just take over the entire place, and and that might screw up the scheme and the plans that others have made within the region. They don't want to have an independent, capable nation that is not under the influence of others. So the best way to do it is, try to get rid of it. In the future, for the Assyrians to be able to have a say, probably we would have no choice but maybe to work, depending on how the map is going to change, with the Turks that massacred us in the first genocide, who are most likely going to have more of an influence on the Mosul Vilayet than the Iraqi government, who just yesterday was screaming, you know, basically in their parliament, you know, that the United States is a great Satan. So we constantly invest in garbage that takes our money, doesn't have any loyalty to us, and instead of working with the individuals who are the same Judeo-Christian value beliefs that we have, because God forbid if you can't control them.
How, I mean, don't answer it if it's going to violate anything, but do you know of any approach to the Assyrians for the current situation in Iran, or is that not on the table at all?
No, I mean, we've actually lost. I think the last number was there were two Assyrians and one Armenian who were killed by by because they participated in the protest. But nah, the Assyrians really have no play in that fight, in this current fight. I mean, everybody wants to see a regime change, but that again, that has to be the controller out of the bazaar. The Persians have to be the ones to do it. I mean, yeah, people are dancing in the streets that Khamenei was killed, but that's completely different than a million man march in Tehran to say, okay, we want the government change now, and that has not manifested itself yet. They still haven't taken to the streets to do that. And frankly, I'm going to be honest with you. The issue is that after all these years, the United States, and I've told them, stop investing in numbers, invest in quality more than quantity, and the Syrians bring that quality in. But the issue is that uh, United States is tired, man. We're just like, we don't care about that region. Let it burn, you know. And people don't understand that. We're like, we got China to deal with, you know. What you know better? What happens to Taiwan is going to have more of a existential effect on our civilized society than what happens in Jerusalem, you know. But that's a bigger worry for us. You know, I as an Assyrian uh, may not be happy with some of the decisions that rural polities make. I mean, you got Israel. You know, the Jews went through a Holocaust, but they haven't ever recognized the Syrian genocide. Yet they've given support and financial and monetary support to the Kurds, who have tried to eradicate the Syrians so you can replace them with you know, with themselves. But as I always told my Kurdish friends that are there in small numbers, I go, every time you dig on the ground, there's something Assyrian pulls up. There's nothing that pulls out that says Kurdish. You know, you know, you have a mix of the languages, Persian and Arabic mix, and you know, the only thing I've ever seen that historically in the region was 100-year-old grave of a Kurdish person. But you know, they're populous. They're standing on that territory, and they do want to have a say. But unfortunately, they're tribal. Their just leadership is all confused, and unfortunately, the individuals who made billions of dollars from U.S. Government contracting are currently fighting each other more than coordinating anything effective for even the Kurdish people in the region.
Wow. And then got another question here. It says, is the Syrian, again from Blackwell, same person, is the Syrian Christian its own denomination?
Assyria was so significant in world history that even in the Old Testament, before Israel was mentioned, anybody else, the borders of Assyria have been described in Genesis, in the first part of it. The Assyrian Christians are actually, if you look at the first church established, the church in Babylon is where what the Assyrian Christians are. It was Assyrian Christians that accepted the preachings of Jonah, that spread Christianity throughout the Middle East. Every church historically that was ever found in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Turkey, in Iran, in Mongolia, in Japan, in India, in Korea, all of it is because of the Assyrian Christians and the Assyrian church that spread Christianity throughout that entire region. It wasn't a Roman Catholic church, it was the Assyrians, the Eastern church, that did that.
Wow, that's something else. So going back to pull up the map here again. So the Assyrian, now tell me, how did the Assyrian Christians convert? So initially, I know when I was visiting and we're doing the research with that, I think it was a bishop there in Chicago, where the Assyrian community is, where you're from. He was mentioning that, and I think him and you mentioned that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I apologize, that initially Nineveh, so you're looking at Jonah and that time, that was the monotheism. So that was kind of the shift over to that the Bible based monotheistic belief that came from that area. And then that made them more receptive to looking at Jesus and accepting Jesus, and then moving forward in Christianity. Is that correct?
The Syrian Christians, even when they believed in God Ashur and those concepts, God Shamash, there was always one controlling God figure. And I'll give you an example. Catholic Church, we have different type of saints, right? That doesn't mean that those saints are the main God. All those different deities that existed under the ancient Assyrians, before Christianity, before Jesus, they still all were uh, a manifestation of what God Shemesh wanted for them. Okay, so there was one God, and all these other deities that existed were really the version of what one God ideology wanted. So when Jonah goes into Nineveh, it's like, he has to preach to him, and he's reluctant, but he preaches to him. He's reluctant. Why? Because he knows that the concept that he's going to preach to him has existed in them. Was there even when they were an empire? It wasn't something foreign. Okay. So when he preached to them, they're like, okay, they accepted it. And it's in the Bible, it says, the Assyrians are the rod of my anger. They always existed because of that. What I just explained to you, Iraq, World War II, East and West War, fight against ISIS. We're always been there to whoop the crap out of people, but not in a negative way, but for the betterment of civil society. And there's a reason we're still around. We're the only nation that has been a global, uh, for, kind of say the Wi-Fi nation, long before anybody was. We're all over the map. And Assyrian in China still keeps its tradition, just like an Assyrian does in the United States. We're still proud of our tradition, our history that will never be taken away from us. And the historical lands up in the north of Iraq are our lands. Today, the Kurds call them Kurdistan. The Arab calls them Iraq. Turk calls them part of their old Ottoman Empire, but they're all Assyrian lands.
Wow.
So it's not something surprising or different. When the Shah was still alive, there was an organization called the Assyrian Universal Organization was established because Assyrian leaders got with the Shah and said, here's what we would like to do. Before the organization was established, of course, they say, here's what we would like to do. We would like to get guarantees from you. We'll take all Assyrians from here. We'll take them to Lebanon. And we can take all the Shia from Lebanon and bring them to Iran. But we need your support to do that. Why? Because the Assyrians understood the whole concept of how the Shia crescent that enveloped Israel, which led to the current fight, would be, because they understood if we're in the northern, if we're in Lebanon, which Lebanon was a historical garrison for the Assyrians. Even Babylon was. Not Babylon, but I'm sorry, Bethlehem. Bethlehem was an Assyrian garrison for the ancient Assyrian army. They used that as a garrison, to move into the various different areas, and affect Egypt and the land of Canaan. And so that decision was made. So an organization was created, names were taken, and Assyrians were ready, willing to go to Lebanon, because that was, remember when I told you, when the Egyptians were trying to link up with an Assyrian military unit, that was where one of the military generals had established himself to conduct a counterattack and retake the Assyrian cities after they had been sacked by the Medes and the Babylonians. So that organizer was created to conduct that, to counter what now has become the Shia Crescent, that put all the pressures and the Seven Front War against Israel. So Assyrians have always understood the land. We've been there long before any of these countries ever manifested themselves on the map. And not only were we historically important, we're biblically important. To an extent where a Jew called Jonah reluctantly had to go and preach to the Assyrians, and they're like, okay, no problem. We get a 3 day fast, no food, no water. I've done that in the past. Trust me, we'll whoop you behind, as they call the rogation on invites. Of course, I haven't been able to do it for the past 2 years because of my medical issues. And unfortunately, it failed. Why? Because the Mennonite church leader got involved in it. He's like, wait a minute, I can't have the Assyrian church come over here. I may lose my demographics and I'll be marginalized and I'm going to be incorporated with them. You know what?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, no. Oh, by the way, we're not just Maronite anymore, and we're not Assyrians. Lebanese are all Assyrians. We're now Christian Arabs.
Oh, wow.
Politics is politics. I don't blame the bishops for trying to hold their ground, and not lose their position in the structure. Even the Chaldean church, which is a Roman Catholic church, when because of the schism that took place between the Church of the East and the West, when the Roman Catholic Church had its footprint in the region, and I'm of course a Roman Catholic myself. My dad was. My daughters are from the Eastern Church. The Romans like, what should we name the Catholics or the Assyrians who convert to Catholicism? Let's call them Chaldeans, because the Chaldeans and the Assyrians were they were enemies a long time ago. And it's funny today. The Chaldeans have their own flag, and they're flying around. And of course, Saddam used that to his advantage. He's like, wait a minute, I'm going to have the Chaldeans in my command structure to protect me, be my generals. And it was Assyrians who actually trained all the general officers. One Assyrian general who trained all the general officers in the Iraqi government, under the Ba'ath regime. And this way, we separate them. But I keep on telling all the Chaldeans, I go, listen to me, you're just a Roman Catholic. Get rid of your stupid flag. I said, and all of you guys live in northern areas of Iraq. Okay, if you are like ancient Chaldeans, why don't you grab your happy ass, take your bishop, and go and freaking set up a church in Karbala? I'll make sure that I give a phone call to the Iranian aligned militias that you're about to spread Christianity there. I'm sure they'll be happy about it. Like, come on, man, stop playing stupid games. But it is what it is. Politics always gets involved, and they screw the pooch. So there's only really the Syrian Church of the East. Unfortunately,
we mentioned how they got with Jonah. So there's Jonah and Nineveh being an Assyrian city, and they were already, as you said, very close to monotheistic. But now, how did they convert to Christianity, and how was that before Rome, let's say?
Well, no, I mean, I told you, they accepted Christianity. That's where Thomas went there and established a church. Go to the Bible. It's all in there. Yeah.
Thomas?
Yeah.
So he was the one that converted the Assyrians.
Yep.
Okay.
All the Assyrians are basically tied to that church. Look.
So has it merged with Rome, or is it separate? Or how does this work?
We were all part of the same church. The schism took place. It had nothing to do with the Assyrian church really pushing it. It was just
so the
schism that took place between Constantinople and East and the Western Church. So, but unfortunately, we're not in full communion with them. If you go to the Assyrian Church liturgy, it's much more. That and the Latin liturgy, they're pretty much very close to each other and the same. There's not much of a difference. And people always try to say, "Oh, that's a Assyrian church. That's an historian." We're not historians. We're not followers of the story. We are the church. The church that was established based on the apostles. We're still tied to that. We're not separate from most of the Assyrian church leaders today that are patriarchs. Today's patriarch of the Assyrian church actually studied in Rome. He got his degree in Rome. So it's unfortunate.
what do you call it, a part of or a right
Yes.
within the Catholic Church?
I think the problem is, and I thought that with the new American Pope coming in, he should have done this. He should have said, "Listen to me. We got to get rid of this Catholic Chaldean garbage. I know we have individuals who are converted to Catholicism in the region who are Assyrians who are converted to Catholicism. I'm going to put the head of the Assyrian Church, the patriarch, the lead for me to take care of the Eastern, Eastern Christianity."
Mm.
I think if he did that, it would streamline church operations. The two would be in full communion, uh, and uh, and then you would probably have a better relationship with the Orthodox Church,
Mm.
that is tied to Russia. And I think it would streamline everything when it came to just the management of the church and the church community. It would get
Wow.
him closer to each other, but that's a decision he has to make, whether or not he's going to be allowed to do that based on how the numbers fall out and the dollars. Like when we're fighting against ISIS, and there were Assyrians who were put into who were captured by ISIS after the Khyber River was cleansed. I remember I actually was on stage in Japan when you were there with me, and that evening I'm talking there. 5 minutes before I get on stage, you want to talk about pressure? I get a call. Hey, they're clearing the Khyber River Valley. We need command support structures and targeting. I'm like, dude, I'm about to walk on stage, in Japan. There's no way I'm able to do anything for you. And
This explains that Subaru
yeah,
speech. Now it makes sense.
the Subaru. So we actually intercepted the communication, our guys, between ISIS and the Roman Catholic Church envoy, who was negotiating to make sure that the church properties that belong to the Roman Catholic Church were not, attacked.
Mm.
And I'm like, dude, what about, hey, how about let's free the Christian Assyrians that are under captivity? But for them, it's like, well, you got your own patriarch. What do you want us to do?
Mm.
But I think in this case, if the church has worked together under the current pope, I think it would be much better for the global church community than anything else. Look, like I said, you get rid of the, at the end when Jesus, gives his last words, his last breath on the cross, he says, it's finished. Well, it's finished in English means something completely different what it means in Latin. You know,
Mm.
in Latin, the word has a legal terminology that can apply to both a military campaign, a legal campaign on a receipt for a business issue, and a spiritual, a spiritual connotation.
Mm.
And Aramaic, which people like, well, Latin, no. Plato, Aristotle, yes, we know there were Greeks. Where do you think they studied? They studied in schools in Syria, Randall schools. It
Mhm.
was the ancient Assyrians that had established the educational system there. So majority of the philosophy that the teachers that taught them came from the Assyrians. Actually, the word we used for the Greeks was Ionia, which means Ionians, because at that time there were Ionians. We actually named the Greek islands and the Greek people,
Mm.
you cannot, if you're such a vast empire, you have so much of an effect on the entire theology of religions in the region. Even the Quran is 10% of it has Aramaic words in it.
Mm.
Uh, and you're so vast that in the Bible itself, in the Old Testament, before any other nation is described, they describe the borders of Mat Asher, which is ancient Assyria.
Mm.
And
Wow.
Genesis, you are very significant in the region. So who knows what's going to happen in the future? There's a old line from Isaiah 19 to 23 that says, if you ever want a peace in the region, in the Middle East, there's going to be three countries, right? And those countries has to be Assyria, uh, Egypt, and also Israel. And Israel would be a lesser of the other two for that to happen. In Egypt, we have the Coptic Christians that basically run all the, economics for the Egyptian government, even though they're not in charge. Israel exists as a state Egypt does. The only thing that doesn't exist as a state is Assyria. If the Bible is correct, and it says that the only way you're going to have peace in that region is you have to have these three physical entities as countries, then Assyria needs to exist for you to ever have peace in the region. Whether or not that's going to happen, I have no clue.
Wow. That's so little. Well, I think the Pope is from Chicago, so you just call him up and say, "Hey, right over a slice of that deep dish pizza," and say, "This is the way you should go with setting that up the Assyrian over there for the East."
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll take one of my bear jackets. I mean, I'm kind of disappointed in him anyway. We didn't win the Super Bowl this year, so I'm like, if the Pope can't deliver a Super Bowl to Chicago, how the hell is he going to deliver? They should call us Surrey.
Well, the Super Bowl hit Seattle. So
yeah, it did. And actually, I don't know if you know, but the last three times that a Pope had been changed, the year after the Pope came in, Seattle either won the Super Bowl, but all three times Seattle was in the Super Bowl.
Huh. Yeah. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
So somehow you guys are tied to the Pope. I have no clue.
Yeah, to look at the top of that space needle again, see what's up there. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And then I'm just going to double check, make sure there's no questions coming in on the Signal chats, and then we'll.
Oh, why didn't you tell me I was talking so long?
No, it was good. I said, this is open forum. It's a detective lounge. We just kind of hang out and chat until. So we do that. Let me double check here.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize if I talk too much, guys. But hopefully, there's a lot of information people can go research.
There's a comment on Signal. I can't, because of this interface, I can't do it from Signal. But someone on Signal that's listening in basically said you should send an email to Huckabee. Maybe he would be interested in setting you up with a little nation there.
Yeah, I think Huckabee has other issues. Yeah, I shouldn't burn the political bridge before us. Look.
That's funny.
I told a evangelical Christian one time, and I've had my run-ins with him in Iraq. I remember I was in Iraq when the genocide was taking place and those certain Christians were displaced, and there's an evangelical church leader there, and he's sitting there talking to two Kurds in the hotel lounge, and I'm having my cappuccino there, and he's trying to convert them, to be part of a member of his church, and he's like, oh, he runs upstairs. He's like, I got to get you something that I forgot to bring down here. And then one of the Kurdish guys is talking to the other Kurdish guy. He's like, hey, don't screw this up for me. Okay. We want to get to United States. And let's start laughing my ass off because I'm like, I know the Kurds were just sitting there shaking their heads. They had no interest about joining his church. They just wanted freaking a free immigration visa to get the hell out of Iraq, or it's like being overrun by ISIS. And he comes on and he's done. Of course, I didn't, tell the church leader, hey, this is the reason why the Kurds care about your church. I don't know what happened after that. Who knows? Maybe the Kurd guy went to United States and became, church leader in this church. But I said, hey, can I show you something? I go, come on out, down. We go outside, and there's Assyrians. These are the people who are in $500 million houses that's selling trinkets. I said, do you know who these people are? He goes, yeah, these are, people, the Iraqi people are wonderful. Look at the beautiful stuff. I got to buy something wrong. I'm like, dude, these are the freaking damn displaced Assyrians. Okay. This is the language Jesus spoke was Aramaic. I said, you're over there trying to convert two guys. God bless you. But how about freaking supporting the actual root of Christianity, the Assyrian church? It was like talking to a wall. He had no concept of what I was talking about. I'm like, okay, whatever, and then we basically say goodbyes, and he didn't even buy a trinket from any of those guys. Okay. Because I guess the cappuccino machine at his church needed more funding than helping the certain Christians on the ground. I'm like, you get certain Christians, you're members of your church being displaced and killed, butchered by ISIS, and you're over there trying to convert two Muslim guys to be members of your church. So I was talking later on with the evangelical. I go, preacher, can you tell me how many people you've saved, or how many people are in heaven? It's like, well, blah, blah. This is what my church does. We've converted. I'm like, listen, you're not listening to me. I want to see the numbers on paper. How many people actually died and went through the gates? Can you give me that? He's like, well, nobody can give you that. Okay, there you go. So you don't even have numbers on paper you could show me. I said, look, can I make a recommendation to you? I said, think about when you approach and at that time I was with a gentleman. You know him well. I'm not going to mention his name. A Jewish gentleman, an older Jewish gentleman. We all know, and he was literally trying to talk to this Jewish gentleman about the whole concept of, the red heifers, establishment of the, of the temple. And I said, listen, I have a friend of mine. He's Jewish. We're here for a conference. Okay. Do you know how insulting it is for you to go tell a Jewish guy, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take red heifers and I'm going to take him and have your rabbi bless them. And then so they can be sacrificed, so a third temple can be built, so Jesus can come back and tell you Jews that I'm the Messiah and you're all screwed up. I said, you know how stupid that is? If I was a rabbi, I would probably take your money, say it would cost me $1 million for me to bless them, and I would curse the red heifers. I said, you have to understand what is coming out of your mouth. I said, who comes up with these concepts? Have you even read the Bible yourself? Have you ever looked at Old Testament, what it says about Old Jerusalem, New Jerusalem? I said, go read it. I said, guess who wrote that? Jews wrote it. The New Testament was written by a bunch of Jews. The Old Testament was written by a bunch of Jews. I'm not a preacher, but I can tell you there's nothing that you're preaching in those southern churches that have $10,000, coffee machines. Oh, by the way, when I asked the Council of Churches to support the Christians of South Sudan, they got $0. Okay, at the same time they were building a new office for their folks to run their mega church down there. I said, you can understand how this comes across. I said, this is, read the Bible every now and then yourself and stop insulting these people. Especially when I have a guest with me, to me it was insulting what he did with our friend. I could tell his name, Myron. Myron, he's got a temper. I'm like, it's okay, Myron, I got him. I don't think the church community that exists out there really has a clue. If they go back and just read the Bible in Aramaic and Latin, it changes the entire philosophy of what the Bible is. Well, unfortunately, they're not reading in the language Jesus. Jesus isn't speaking English. He spoke in Aramaic. He spoke in Hebrew, and he preached. And of course that was translated into Latin, and it's much closer to realities of what I have to deal with. And if you bounce any of those off of what is taught by preachers in the churches that are not even tied to the 12 apostles, who established really the church itself through the process of bishops and the clergy that came after that, then you're just shooting your shot in the dark, and which is the reason why I don't think global Christianity is able to really move forward the way it should, because it's just so many different branches with ideologies that don't even really counter what they would understand if you just read in their own Bible. And that's my preaching for the day. Please send the money to my church.
It's the Assyrian church branch there in Chicago. That's pretty good. And then the final comment, actually, again, from Black Wolf. I checked the other ones. So I think this will be it. It says, thanks for all the information. So much new information to process. Yeah, so we actually covered a lot. And if I can we get you back on, because there's a lot on the religious side of it, to talk kind of the Assyrian Christian and pretty much what you did, and just kind of dive into that, and then how it is in the diaspora versus back over in the Assyrian, traditional Assyrian lands, things like that. Would you be open to that in a couple of weeks or something? Or if
we could do a couple of weeks, because as I'm talking to you, I have family members are looking at me with knives in their hands, because they're like, dude, what the heck? You got us locked on a Sunday.
Sorry. We'll let you go then.
Yes, I just got the number one.
That's where that broken arm came from. It wasn't combat. It was right there in Chicago.
Yeah.
Home. I understand it.
You see, I'm even as I said, the prophet is not even loved in his own.
Oh my goodness!
Community.
Well, tell him I apologize very strongly for.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Very, very sorry. I apologize to your family. We'll let you go. Thank you, sir, very much for coming on. We'll do it again in 2 weeks, and we'll keep the shot group a little bit tighter.
Yes, we have to. Otherwise, I make it to my 57th birthday.
I'll send another Purple Heart your way. We'll do good. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Okay, boys. Bye.
All right. Okay, so there's that. Just in review real quick, and thank you for the questions, and we'll have a couple others. Oh, thank you. All right. Real quick, so what he's saying is Assyrian. I know for a lot of people, they still get Assyrian and Syrian there. So Syrian is derivative, but Assyria was that larger empire that actually began. We're looking, about 1500 to 1600, 1500 BC, right? So that's when the Assyrian Empire started, and I don't know, hopefully it'll show up in the colors, but that was the area he talked about. So even in Bereshit or Genesis, it started around that area. So you're looking at the Arbela, Arapha, Ashur, that Ashur Valley on the Mesopotamian plain, and that the cradle of civilization, right? So that's Assyria, the Assyrians, and eventually it spread up into basically southern. The southern, what's now southern Turkey, over into Iran, down through what's now Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Sinai, Egypt, and then down the Nile all the way down to Thebes. So at one point, that was one empire, and that lasted from about 1500 roughly to 600. So they actually fought with the Egyptians, and at some point were administering over the kingdom of Egypt, but it was Assyrian governors that did it. And when he mentioned, notice he mentions a lot from the Bible, from biblical text. The Assyria was mentioned as the rod of God. This was the punishing factor that would come in to kind of level things out, and they kind of maintained that culture for a very long time. Even into World War II, they became a very militaristic kind of group that were able to kind of move military operations forward and take a lot of pain as they went forward. But that was back and forth, and so that was the Assyrians that then. You had a couple of different breakaways, but the Persian Empire basically took the Assyrian area with the Syrians still in it and expanded on it a little bit more. So you go further into what's now Libya, you move further into what's now Turkey, into parts of what's now Greece, right? So the Hellenic areas. And that's kind of where Western history picks up, is the conflict in that cultural connection zone between the Hellenic world and the Persian world, which contains large elements of Assyrians merging in there. And then they went even further into what's called Parthia, so more into Iran. They took over most of Iran, into Bactria. So you're looking at Afghanistan, you're looking at India, further into there, up into kind of the steppes. So that was a huge empire. And that lasted. That one was about 500 BC. So the fall of the Assyrians, or the transformation of the Assyrian into the Persian. The Babylonians at one point move in here. And then these are the lines, if you'll notice, Rome then ascends. So you have the Greeks push back a little bit. Egypt becomes off and on. Judea fights. And then what happens is Alexander the Great, remember? So Alexander the Great comes through. He pushes along the roads and the connections and the trade routes that the Assyrians had begun. The Persians established even further. And then he's able to use those existing routes of connectivity, routes and resources. He uses those to push all the way into India. And then he comes back. Of course, he dies in Babylon, or what's about Baghdad. And then he divides up this empire into three, right? So now you have kind of three. This is divided up into three. And then the Hasmonean dynasty, kind of that Judean dynasty, comes up. And that's really modern Judaism actually can trace historically there, right? So the Hellenic period is where we get the formative of what we identify as Judaism today, for example. That comes during this period when there's a vacuum of power, and the Hasmoneans have to establish now borders and separate, and they're beginning to get their own political entity. They're not under the Egyptians or the Assyrians or the Persians. They're trying to set themselves apart from the Seleucid dynasty, from the Seleucid Greeks there. So that was their dynasty, and then but they're a border state, right? So they'll move back and forth. And so while they're fighting the Assyrian Greeks, they align then with Rome. And then Rome comes in, and this is where the story picks up in the minds and the paradigms of most people in America and the West, is from that period. But there's a long period before that of the exchange of ideas and the exchange of information, myths, legends, trade networks, and peoples. And so that goes on for a very long time. And then if you go over to History DA, we have an article about, pretty much it picks it up when kind of the British become interested in this in the 19th century. But these routes, areas in that area, especially with the Persian corridor right in the center of that, actually just east over there where Media is, and Elam, where it is, here, Aria, Parthia. So you're looking up in that region. That is Iran, and that's very vital during World War II, because that region, as you see, there's the Caspian Sea. That river going up there, that's the Volga. And the Volga goes right to what used to be Stalingrad in World War II. So the American army, with the British help, the British kind of formulated the plan. we built factories all up in Iran to supply materials to keep Stalin in the war by just sailing it up from basically Tehran, the ports just north of Tehran. You sail it up the Caspian Sea, it goes up the Volga River, you offload it at Stalingrad, and then that feeds it. That was one of the deciding factors why the Germans wanted to cut that pipeline of equipment off. And we were manufacturing Ford trucks and engines and planes, and there's P-40s, and you name it, we're manufacturing it in Iran and sending it up. Meanwhile, the British got the oil right out of Iran. So the British Petroleum Company, they're very big into Iran, and they were doing that. And it was the nationalization of those British oil resources ownership in Iran during the 1950s after World War II that then created the British asked the United States to help with overthrowing Mossadegh, who had nationalized it, and the oil revenues. And that led to the Shah. We installed the Shah to maintain the British control of the oil. And then, of course, the revolution in 1979, and that's kind of the trajectory of it. Now we're back again into that region, looking to, for various reasons, but the same routes and resources. And if you look here, this looks remarkably like what people talk about on, these designs and plans for grabbing kind of this greater region. They're recreating the Assyrian Empire. They're recreating the Persian Empire. They're recreating the Islamic, or the beginning first two phases of the Islamic Empire, or the Arabian Empire. It wasn't so much Islamic as it was Arabian. It became more Islamic over time, but in the beginning, it was primarily Arabians that were moving forward, taking the old lines, the old imperial lines. So the geography kind of lends itself to the same forms over time, and it tells you a lot about the region and where it is, and the peoples within it, and who can move alliances based on what trade. So good information from Colonel Sargis. One of the things he mentioned with Iran, if you weren't here in the very beginning of it, was the trade line. So the Persians only make up about 50% of Iran. The rest are people that have come in. So Arabs, he had Turks, different various groups of Turks that have come in, Kurds have come in. So it's very much a mix, was created now within Iran. But the Persians, being even though they're only 53% of the Iranian population, control or dominate most of the bazaars. And it's very important because the revolution that occurred in Iran in 1979 that overthrew the Shah started in the bazaars. It didn't start as an Islamic revolution. It started almost as kind of a middle-class educational subclass that was pushing forward from the bazaars. So if the bazaars were unhappy, the government was going to fall. And those same lines are owned predominantly today by the Persians, which also own a majority of the, or he says a large part of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which is kind of the security structure within Iran. And interestingly, if you missed it in the beginning, he mentioned that the Ayatollah is not Persian. The one that was just killed was not Persian. It says the president is a Kurd. Right. So, they're not even Persians within there. So we're talking about a multitude of different ethnicities in there. He was a Assyrian Christian. So he's not Persian. He's not Turkish. He's not Kurd. He's Assyrian from the old Assyrian Empire. But he was born and raised in northeast Iran. And that was his family line. So there's a lot of different groups within there. And he talked about, how that kind of gets overlooked. And sometimes the United States doesn't really look at, as much as we used to, those existing social networks, those existing patterns of behavior, religious beliefs, ethnicity groups, cultural groups, historical culture within that. The old OSS did. We kind of agreed that maybe the organizational structure today doesn't quite emphasize that as much as just, create a new narrative and control it, and that sort of thing. And then the final part, which Black Wolf was actually asking about, do Assyrians have a homeland? No. And they've experienced multiple genocides, as Sargis said, over time, even though they live throughout these disparate areas. And the most recent was in the last 10 years in Iraq and Syria, where ISIS and ISIL were conducting genocide operations against Assyrian Christians. And sadly, for whatever reasons, the United States was not going to help them out whatsoever. So keep that in mind as things go through. Sometimes there's political narratives that are developed, but that don't bear reality to what occurs on the ground. So that was quite interesting. In that. So if there are any further questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. I've asked him if he'll come back in a couple of weeks, and we'll probably hone in just on the religious part, because there was questions about Assyrian Christians. What are they? Where'd they come from? What are their belief cycles? Where are they? Because the huge diaspora of Assyrian Christians are here in the U.S. and Canada and everywhere else. In fact, Chicago, when I went there to study this a few years ago, I was actually surprised. There's quite a vibrant community, but they're kind of quiet, so you don't know they're there. But it is important to kind of understand that's one of the people in the neighborhood, and a significant part within the history and the current operations, which are in the Middle East, is that Assyrian group, the Assyrian Christian group that's there. Even though they have they've been diminished somewhat for successive genocides since the early 20th century, starting with the Ottomans and then ISIS and ISIL. And who knows what's going to happen now with this massive destabilization in that region. If it doesn't stabilize, it's going to be a bloodbath, and it could go global. And there's a lot of indications here. There's a lot of uncertainty. Is this like the Sarajevo moment that cascades from basically, Serbia versus Austria-Hungary into a global war? Is this that same kind of incident? Time will tell. But a lot of the factors and indicators are there. And I would recommend looking back at some of the things that we did on World War I. I'll probably put something else out there about how this cascades, and people were looking at a different outcome, but it was economic, right? It didn't have anything to do really with the Archduke of being assassinated, but it had to do with, that was just what we're going to use as the casus belli, the excuse. It was economic lines and a reshuffling of where those economic flows and who controls what goes in there. And this one has the same earmarks. So I've heard it, I believe it was actually Michael Yon that said, this is the same war. In fact, other people have said very similar up until about 20 years ago. World War I and II are the same war placed within it. And this looks like if this turns into World War III, this would be much the same continuation of those same dynamic forces of people going for economic empire and moving along the very same battlefields that we fought again and again. So World War I was fought here. Parts of World War II, as you heard from Sargis, are fought here, and parts of World War III are basically fought starting in the same region. So lots of good things. Go ahead and put your questions down there, and we will go ahead and finish for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you again for Sargis, and thanks to his family for tolerating us talking over 2.5 hours here. So thank you very much again. We're primarily on Substack. We do go on Facebook a little bit and on X. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in. If you have any suggestions for any topics you'd like us to research, keep in mind we do have active research with the Secure Point Investigations, which is our real world investigation. But when we do love to dive into history, and feel free to ask us anything, and we're more than happy to help out. So have a safe week, and we will see you very shortly.